There are absolutely things that I learned that shook me and that I am certain would shake the American public. Snowden, he did everything wrong. He is a traitor. He does not ever deserve to come back. CIA's mission is not protecting the American people, it's protecting American interests as defined by policymakers.
Teach me how to be a better liar.
Learning how to lie is really just a matter of when you hear certain experts talk about microexpressions and reading someone's face, it is such bullshit.
That's really the only thing that's gonna stop China.
Had COVID not happened,
I know.
Holy dude, we are Hamas. You're suffering because of Israel. And then of course, all those ignorant masses are like, yes, we are suffering because of Israel. This is something most people don't understand. Every nuclear missile is pointed at a target. So it really is like the 1980s Doomsday situation.
So you were in the CIA for 7 years approximately?
Correct.
My wife was like, where was he? I'm like, I don't think you can ask that, but I don't know, here we are.
The where are you, the where did you operate question actually is a question that we can't answer.
Yeah, I figured.
That's one of the, there's actually not many, but that is one of the few that we are hard pressed not to answer.
It seems, right, because otherwise you have to admit, like, we were spying on Saudi Arabia, or wherever you were, like, we were spying on, and the answer is everyone except for the Five Eyes, right?
Yes.
Yeah. Except, in big air quotes, the Five Eyes, yeah. Yeah, that makes sense, because otherwise, right, you have to admit you were spying on somebody, and we spy everywhere, like you said, except for the Five Eyes, and although have we gotten in trouble for spying on the Five Eyes, or has that just been sort of a non-public stuff?
I actually don't know if there's ever been any public flap or public faux pas in the Five Eyes. But what's important to understand is that American military and intelligence doctrine assumes that every country in the world is an enemy. There's just some enemies that have aligned interests that are so strong that we share more with them than with others. So that's where a lot of where the Five Eyes comes from, is the idea that there are these 4 other countries, New Zealand, the UK, the Australians, and Canada. There's these 4 other countries that together make a team of allied, democratic, free peoples who will share more than anybody else. But that does not mean we will share all.
Right. I do wonder, what do they not know, right? What do they not know? Do you have any idea what's off limits? I mean, I'm sure there's nothing public, but surely they know, like, our nuclear program and things like that, or you think that's over that line?
We have a saying inside the agency that there are keys to the kingdom, and nuclear codes are one of those things that we consider keys to a kingdom. Understanding the health of the president, the health of the world, of the chief executive, those are something that we consider keys to the kingdom. So if I had to make an informed guess, I would guess that no, we do not share secrets about our nuclear operational platforms. We do not share secrets about the health of our chief executive, as basic things. But I'm guessing there's also probably, beyond that too. We're not going to share secrets that we know about how we were cyber hacked or cyber violated. We're not going to share secrets that give us an advantage over, let's say, a close trading partner of an allied partner. So for example, China is a main trading partner for both Australia and the UK. So that means it's going to be in our best interest to really protect what we know about China, even from our UK and Australian peers, because we don't want to run the risk of something we know about China leaking back to China through one of the Five Eye peers.
Yeah, that's what makes the most sense to me, right? Because let's say that you have a Aldrich Ames situation, who is a traitor inside the agency, right, who sold nuclear secrets. We don't want the Australian version of that to go, oh, well, I have all these secrets not only about Australia, but about the United States, right. And the leak just becomes even more problematic for everybody involved.
Correct, and you're thinking exactly like an intelligence agency thinks. You've got to have backups of backups of backups. Layered security is what we call it.
Like our lavalier situation.
Exactly, right? We have 2 mics to make sure in case one fails.
That's aside from the secret mics I have hidden around my studio kitchen. Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. I always was curious about that. Before that, you're in the military, yeah?
Yes, I was in the Air Force.
Okay. Flying planes?
I learned how to fly, but I did.
Oh, I was kidding, actually.
Oh, yeah, no. The Air Force taught me how to fly, which was pretty cool. What's funny is this, for me at least, and for many people who are pilots, once you learn how to fly, that's when you fall out of love with flying.
Really?
Because flying is a pain in the ass. Imagine driving in the sky. And that's essentially what flying is.
But you don't have LA traffic.
That is
Yeah.
true. But you do have more damaging effects if you run out of gas.
That's that's true. That's true, right? Like the air conditioner not working is the least of your concerns at that point.
Right.
Yeah.
And then it's just a pain. I mean, you got to worry about airspeed. You got to worry about those fuel smells. Like one of the things that it's really hard for me to shake is how much you smell jet fuel, and it's such a pain in the ass. Once you fall out of love with flying, smelling the fuel smell in an airline is a total turnoff. But to answer your question, I learned how to fly, learned I didn't love flying, and then the Air Force cross-trained me into something called Space and Missiles. And it was in Space and Missiles that I learned about satellite operations and nuclear missile operations, and ultimately ended up being a nuclear missile officer.
Okay. So, and is that when you fell out of love with nuclear missiles?
I mean, I fell out of love with nuclear weapons a long time ago. But it was a pragmatic solution to having to serve my time for the United States. And I mean, I had a fantastic military career, even though I was doing something underground with like a key around my neck that could destroy the world.
Yeah.
And it's kind of one of those best of bad situations. I wasn't as bad off as some people.
Tell me about that job, because when you hear about those NORAD guys, were you one of those NORAD guys that's like looking at or is that a different job?
It is. I mean, this is what's funny about how people perceive nuclear weapons and how people perceive the federal government, really, and all the military and federal government jobs. Media does it wrong because media has to make it look dramatic. But what the government actually wants of its military and its intelligence services is the exact opposite. They want no drama. So what you see in TV is about as far from the truth as you can get. So the NORAD that you see in TV, this giant underground base in Cheyenne Mountain where like there's, futuristic displays and everybody sits in one room and everybody's having sex with everybody else and the bosses don't get along. None of that's the way it actually works.
Yeah, you're like underground in some gas tank sized.
That's exactly right.
Bullshit thing where no cell phone service and just a book and a crappy light that turns off every 20 minutes.
And you're no shit. Your food is basically the same quality of food that you had in high school or middle school, like tater tots and like shrink wrapped Egg McMuffins. Like that is literally what life looks like. And you're down there with just one other person. And
who I'm sure you get along with no matter what. And they make sure of that.
And then you're spread out like 2 to 3 driving hours from each other. So you're like super remote, super alone in the most like remote, austere places in the United States, babysitting nuclear missiles. It's super boring, super low drama.
Especially with the idea that we're hopefully never going to use those nuclear missiles. And although I've heard, and this is, I guess, a pro for that particular job, if there's a nuclear war, those get launched first because they can't move around.
It's interesting. We are a redundancy. And you don't realize that the human beings in the missile silos are a redundancy of a redundancy, right? Like we are not critical personnel, even though we are called critical personnel. But yeah, you're exactly right. I mean, if true nuclear war were to break out, true nuclear war, which is the nuclear war that most people are afraid of, everything would be launched all at once from all nuclear bases to all programmed targets. This is something most people don't understand. Every nuclear missile is pointed at a target. The target can change every few hours or it can change every few days, but they're not all pointed at the same target. They're pointed at different targets because the assumption is that if there is an all-out nuclear war, everybody's going to blow up everybody else. So we might have, let's say there's 300 missiles pointed at 70 different targets. Once the dials turn, everything goes. And everywhere else in the world, the assumption is when they turn the dials, everything goes. So it really is like the 1980s Doomsday situation.
We talked about this on the show with Annie Jacobson, and she said as much. Essentially, like the ones that are in the ground, like the ones you were controlling, they're use it or lose it, right? So they launch just as soon as the launch is detected against us, because those are probably going to get destroyed by whatever's coming in a few minutes, whether it's detected or not.
When a ballistic missile is launched at the United States, the Department of Defense's very technically advanced satellite systems detect that launch within a fraction of a second initially. We have a policy that you're asking about, launch on warning.
So those get launched. I guess maybe the submarine ones are later in the game because they can survive pretty much anything.
And then you have air launched as well.
So how are those launched then? From airplanes?
Correct.
Yeah, okay.
So you have, there's what's called a nuclear triad. And the nuclear triad is air-based nuclear weapons, sea-based nuclear weapons, and then ground-based nuclear weapons.
Okay.
The underground nuclear warheads, the ICBMs, intercontinental ballistic missiles, those are your ground-based of the nuclear triad. But then you have B-52 bombers and other stealth bombers and large-scale bombers that are waiting at all times on alert, so that if a launch is detected, they can quickly be scrambled, loaded up with nuclear warheads that are live, a pin gets pulled, and now they're weaponized, and then they take off. And their whole job is just to loiter, which means kind of fly circles in the sky until all the fallout is done, and we see what targets were destroyed and what targets weren't destroyed, and then they can be directed at those targets.
That makes sense, because I was wondering, if everybody's launching at everybody else, and you're like, oh, well, this one's going to Pyongyang. Well, Pyongyang has been gone for 45 minutes. Why would we launch anything else at that? Hit Novosibirsk instead or whatever. I don't know.
That's exactly.
I mean, hopefully none of this happens. Like, it's nightmare. I mean, everybody, you want to die early if there's nuclear holocaust. That's what I learned from Annie Jacobson.
And that's the exact conclusion that I reached when I was in that field. I mean, in that career field. Just for the men and women who are sitting underground right now, put yourself in their shoes and think about a career in their discipline. They're gonna live underground for about 2 to 4 years on assignment, and then they're gonna rotate to another assignment for 2 to 4 years, and then they're gonna come right back to a missile assignment again, where they go underground again. They rotate out again, and they rotate back again, and that is their career for 20 years of military service.
Brutal.
And they make a whole career out of it, right? That's when they're away from their family, they're not doing God's work. They're just waiting for the hopeful never end of the planet Earth, right?
What do you do to kill time down there? Do you just bring a book and read?
There's a lot of correspondence, education. There's a lot of reading. There's a lot of learning how to make friends with people you don't get along with.
Yeah, man.
Yeah, there's actually a lot of sleeping, but it's not in one long stint, because you can't sleep in one long stint, because every 15 to 30 minutes, there's an emergency action message that comes through, an EAM, and an alarm that like blares. So that's the drill. So what ends up happening is you, as either the junior or the senior missile command officer, you'll try to rest, being interrupted every 4 or so hours.
This is literal torture.
And then you'll work together, and then the other person will rest for about 4 hours, and then you'll work together, and then that's kind of how the shift goes for 24 to 72 hours.
Dude.
But you're always being interrupted, so that's why you never get quality sleep, so you try to get as much low quality sleep as you can.
Are these drills to make sure you're not just like screwing around?
There's two reasons. There's two reasons. One, the drills are there because they need to desensitize you to potentially launching nuclear weapons. So you like when the order comes in to launch a nuclear warhead,
they don't want you going, oh my God, should I do this? I've never had to think about this before. They want you to be like, Jesus Christ, turn the thing, and then just you slam the thing down and go back and you lay in your cot, and then you hear a rumbling sound as the world is destroyed around you.
Correct, because essentially it's all ones and zeros. So you don't actually know if this EAM is an EAM that's really going to launch missiles, or if this EAM is just a drill.
Jeez.
Because you're doing it every 15 or 20 minutes. So it's like one boop, 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 beep, 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 turn, and you go back to sleep. It's, boop, 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 beep, 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 turn and go back to sleep. One of those times, you're exactly right. It's going to be boop, 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 beep, 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 turn, rumble, rumble, rumble.
Right.
Oh, shit.
That was real. Yeah. Right, I just launched a real weapon. So there's a system there that says this is a drill, and then there's a system there that says this is not a drill, and you just have no idea whether
Correct. The system's behind the software of the system. So that's reason number one. Reason number one is so that the crews can't become conscientious objectors. Reason number two is because we assume that our adversaries are tapped into our EAM system. So the Russians, the Chinese, the North Koreans, the Iranians are listening to every emergency action message. And what they see are ones and zeros. Beep, 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 boop, boop, boop. Well, we also have to send a message every 20 minutes, so they don't know what the hell they're seeing either.
Right, so there's some guy whose job it is to monitor you guys doing your boring-ass job, and he's going, emergency action message, yeah, what else is new? And he goes back to playing whatever the Chinese version of Candy Crush is on his phone. And it's just like, whatever. And then one day he hears a rumble, and there's a bright flash, and everything is over.
Yep.
That is just crazy.
And that's your career.
Yeah.
So, I mean, this is why I have such incredible respect for the men and women who do that job, because that is their reality. Just like you and I get to like tune into Netflix every now and then, or we get to veg out to like a long fantasy book, we get to take a 25-minute poop if we want to.
Yeah.
They don't get that option.
Man, you can't even poop underground?
You
Come on,
can,
man.
but you can't take that long.
Okay, because
You
if
can't
the EAM
escape.
comes in, you're just running out. Surely that's happened over 7 years.
I mean, people get food poisoning down there. People show up with the flu down. Like, some nasty stuff happens underground.
Oh yeah, and you're just, the guy comes in and goes, sorry man, I'm sick, and you go, well, I'm definitely getting that.
Yeah, and so is the next guy that comes in after we're done, because you're going to be touching all of his buttons.
Oh man, y'all need Purell. Probably a regulation against spraying that on the nuclear launch computer, but some rules are meant to be broken. So let's talk about what a spy actually is, because that's one of those terms that spies probably never use. And also, people don't know the difference between handlers, analysts, assets, etc. So can we just do like a quick overview?
Sure. I mean, there's a huge index, a huge glossary we could get into.
Yeah.
But I'll keep it simple, and I'll let you tell me where you want to go from there. So you are exactly right. Spy is a term that professional intelligence officers don't use. It doesn't exist. Because what's the definition of a spy? In reality, what we have are agents and officers. Agents are the people who officers recruit to sell secrets about their own country. So you don't have an American agent. What you have is an agent of some foreign country that's giving the U.S. secrets. That's what an agent is. It's very different than FBI. An FBI agent is, in fact, an officer of the country. But in CIA and intelligence terms, an agent is a foreign intelligence source. But then you have intelligence officers. Intelligence officers are the people who are charged by the government of the United States to collect secrets from agents. And the reason that they're called officers is because they come with a certain level of information handling, security handling, information management. They come with real skills that would qualify them as officer cadre.
Okay. And so what was it that you did in this that you can talk about?
I was an intelligence officer. And then inside the intelligence officer cadre, there are many types of officers. There are analysts, there are technical officers, there are field or case officers, there are staff officers, there are paramilitary officers, linguistic officers. I mean, the list is quite significant. Open source analysts. Our disguise people are officers. Our alias doc people who make our documentation are officers. And there's all these different skill sets within. So I was what's known as a staff operations officer, which means an officer who is there's different categories of blue badge and green badge, whether you're a contractor or hired on behalf of the federal government. But I was a federal government staff operations officer, a CIA employee who was not disclosed to the public, whose job was to manage operations, and those operations were intelligence collection operations.
Yeah, okay, that makes sense. Because I, of course, have been tricked a few times, so I was like, all right, is this guy real? So I called my friend Daryl Blocker. I don't know if you know him.
I used to work for Daryl.
Okay, so he was like, I can confirm he definitely worked here and did what he says he did. I was like, oh, okay, cool. Because there's a lot of people, I'm sure you've come across, do you know this person? And you're like, that doesn't sound right. Yeah, there's a few of those.
Well,
around.
there's dozens. What's fascinating is, especially in social media right now, you will hear lots of people come out and say that this was I worked for the agency, or I was an agency officer. And they're not necessarily lying, because the way that the CIA works, it does a lot of different types of blended operations. So it will reach out to the military, like it'll reach out to the Navy SEALs, and it will second a Navy SEAL into CIA for an operation. So for the course of these 3 months, they're still a Navy SEAL, but they're granted CIA status. But then when they're done with their operation, they go right back to the Navy SEALs, and their CIA status is withdrawn. Same thing is true about contractors. That's what happened with Edward Snowden. People thought Snowden was a CIA officer. He was not. He was a contractor hired by CIA for a short period of time to carry out a task before he was then sent back to his contract company.
Booz Hamilton. Yeah.
But
is that right? Yeah.
Booz Allen. I think
Booz Allen, yeah. Or is it Booz Allen Hamilton? We'll figure that out after the show when I get 100 emails about it. Yeah. It was something like that. Yeah, that makes sense. There's this trend I'm sure you've seen where somebody who is an analyst, respectable job, will say, yeah, I'm a CIA officer, and people go, oh my gosh, and then they do the rounds of media, or they write a book or something like that, and but you put 2 whiskeys in them, and they're like, yeah, I was in charge of looking at a lot of documents in a desk, and I never really left the desk, and I know a lot about Egypt. And you're just like, oh, Have you ever been there? No.
Yeah.
Okay. Well, that's not what I thought this was. You know, so there's a whole lot of that. My friends who are all DO guys, like where you were, they were all like, "Don't join. Don't do it." But I'm curious what your opinion.
Well, what year
is.
was it too? I'm curious.
These guys were in the DO like through 9/11, so they must have been joined in the 90s because my law school career ended in 2006. So unless their career was only like a year or two long, which I doubt, they were there through September 11th and everything. And I remember one guy was like, I can never go to Egypt, and I never even saw the frickin' pyramids, and I was there for a long time because he got PNG'd. So persona non grata is basically you get banned from a country.
Right.
So he's banned from a country. I don't know if they found out he was there illegally. I guess that's probably why.
Well, that's what's funny about PNG status is, I mean, it is a punitive measure against the federal government more than a person. So he could have not even been discovered. He could have been totally an upstanding citizen in Egypt, but Egypt wanted to send a message to the United States, so it would PNG 10 people on a list, and he could have been one of those people.
I see. Okay. So maybe they didn't know anything
But
about
I think there's a couple things that are important here. So one, you were being considered potentially for recruitment at a critical time, 2006 to 2007. I was recruited in 2007. That means the post 9/11 or the pre 9/11 cadre were still in charge. But the reason 9/11 happened, frankly, I mean, I'm sorry to say this about your friends, was because the pre 9/11 people didn't keep us safe on 9/11.
Sure.
The CIA pre 9/11 was focused on Cold War stuff. It was staffed with, for the most part, Caucasian, Ivy League educated
That's
people.
what this dude was. He told me, he's like, the agency is so broken, you can't get anything done. You can't even do your own job. I mean, that's why he told me not to join.
So
not
that was-
because it was boring or something.
And that led to the September 11th attacks. That led to us failing to prevent the September 11th attacks. Well, then September 11th happened. 2 years after September 11th, the 9/11 Commission came out. That was when the federal government, especially the Congress and the House, all came together. The House and the Senate came together and said, CIA, you're broken. FBI, you're broken. You guys caused this whole thing. So now we, as the federal legislature, are going to come in and force you to change. That was 2003. That turned into a ton of money coming into the federal government, all focused on counterterrorism operations, which had been overlooked prior to 2003. And then this massive surge of new hiring. And the new hiring was not Ivy League Caucasian people anymore.
Right.
It was people of diversity, people who had world travel, people who had foreign languages, people of a certain age group. So when
I was like 25.
I was 27.
Yeah.
Right? That's what they were looking for, was mixed ethnic, like people with strong educational histories, but not necessarily from predictable schools.
Yeah.
A huge variance from what the pre-9/11 days look like.
Yeah, that's interesting. When I was in the 90s, I remember asking a guy who's a former intel officer how to join, and he was like, join a church and or the Freemasons. And he's like, what ethnicity are you? Because this was not a in-person conversation. And I was like, a white dude from Michigan. He's like, okay. And he told me this very totally antiquated way that they recruit, which was go to an Ivy League school. That was one of the things. Join a church and or the Freemasons and like rise up in the ranks of whatever you can, because they look for, I don't know, just like really waspy people probably. And then
Because they were looking for people loyal to the body, not loyal to the organization.
I see.
Right? Loyal to the body means loyal to the other CIA officers. Because pre 9/11, it was kind of the Wild West. There was not a lot of oversight. There was a big black budget that officers could just do whatever they wanted to do. A term was coined that is unfortunately still present at CIA now, where you were looking for people who will play nicely in the sandbox.
Okay.
So you're basically looking for other kids that you want to let into your sandbox, so they'll all play nicely with each other. But if you're the kind of kid that comes in and is like, well, why are we playing in a sandbox? Or if you throw sand in somebody else's face, or if you take someone else's truck, they don't want you in their sandbox anymore. That was all pre 9/11. There are still cultural vestiges of that that have carried through, because the senior officers there right now were the junior officers before 9/11.
Sure. Okay.
So that cultural carryover is still there. But in about 10 more years, they'll be gone.
Right. It'll be interesting. Yeah. I'd never been to CIA headquarters or anything, but I'm guessing in the 90s it was a bunch, like you said, a bunch of white dudes. And now it's like men, women, different colors, different hairstyles. I assume, did you have that hair at the scene? No.
I tried. I
You
tried
tried?
having long hair, and it turned into a big deal for the trainers there, because the people training us were vestiges of the
I see.
pre-Cold War. You've never been to CIA headquarters. Do you want to go?
Yeah.
I will take you.
Yeah, that would be awesome. That would be really
They'll
cool.
only let us on the first floor. but
Well.
It's the coolest floor, to be honest.
Okay, yeah. The one with the stars and the
Yep.
flags and everything.
Yep,
Yeah,
and all the busts and all the art and all the museums.
Sweet. Yeah, no, the other floors I can only imagine look like, it's like an embassy, right? You're like, whoa, this place is amazing. And then the rest of it's an office. And it's like, well, shit.
So true.
So
It's all cubicles and cream-colored walls.
Yeah, I ended up, I was working at the embassy in Panama in 2002. But it took forever to get my security clearance because of September 11th. And I remember I had a meeting with one of the security guys, and he was like, let me expedite this for you. I know you want to start your career. And I said, here's my stuff. He's like, I don't know why it's taking so long. I mean, September 11th, we're really busy, but like, how hard can it be to clear a guy? And he looked, and it was like, lived in Germany, but the former East Germany. And then it was like Israel. And it is, how long did you spend in Egypt? And he's like, this is going to take years. So I ended up working in a part of the embassy that didn't require any security clearance, and I couldn't go on the other floors, but my friends could, and I was like, just tell me what's on the other floors. And he's like, it looks like the second floor, except in the corner there's a box where you can light shit on fire. And I was like, that's it? That's all? You have like an incinerator? And they're like, that's all. And there's no USB ports to put in your music or whatever. And I'm like, that sucks. Because I was just making travel arrangements for like narco officers in Panama and the military, and basically sending guys to Vegas on the U.S. taxpayers' dime. Sorry, folks. And that was it. And they were like, yeah, I'm looking at a bunch of crap. Like, I actually ended up with one of the better jobs with like minimal responsibility, actual stuff that I was doing, and those guys were just doing intern work, but in a secured area, which is awful. It's the equivalent of being in an underground tank for 3 days at a time. Not quite.
Well, I mean, I think that's the thing. That's, again, we were talking about how media gets it all wrong. What you just described, that's clandestine operations. What you see on James Bond and Jason Bourne and what you see in Alias and what you see in most of that, that's not how it works. It works like it's a plain building with a secure floor. There's a big heavy bolt on the front door. And once you go past that door, there's no iPods, there's no cell phones, there's no music, there's no this, there's no freedom.
Yeah.
There's just secure messaging systems. And guess what? Secure messaging systems don't carry GIFs and can't handle PDFs. So it's all tippity-tap,
No
right?
emojis, yeah. No, I mean, back then, cell phones, if you even had one, were like, it had Snake on it, you know. But yeah, I could bring my phone. Nobody cared. Those guys had to leave theirs in a box. I've heard you talk a bit about your upbringing on other shows and how you started keeping secrets kind of early-ish. And I wonder, well, one, what happened? And also, did that make compartmentalization in your life easy when you got to CIA?
Yeah, and it's, you know, I love these conversations because, like with most people, what's my childhood, I tend to think of as normal for everybody's childhood.
Yeah, same, of course.
Like, we all think that if whatever our childhood must have been the average for everybody else. And it's surprising to me when it's not. So I didn't trust my parents growing up. And it was because my father died before I was really born. I think technically he died when I was a few months old, but he was out of my life before I was ever born. So I always just kind of summarize and say he died before I was born. My mom remarried a Caucasian guy who became my stepdad when I was 5. And apparently we had a good relationship until I was 5. But once I hit like 12 or 13, and once I had half sisters, which were his biological children with my mother, our relationship kind of got shaky.
That's too bad.
Well, I mean, I think, again, that's the plight of a step-parent. As an adult and a dad now, I kind of sympathize with my stepdad for what he must have had to go through.
Really?
But regardless, I'm 7 years old, and I'm learning I can't trust my dad, that there's favorites.
Yeah,
he clearly shows favoritism towards my sisters. He clearly trusts what they say more than what I say. So I'm learning I can't trust him. And then my biological mother, who's trying to make a marriage work, again, 44 years old looking back, it makes sense. But 7 years old, 8 years old, 9 years old, it didn't make sense. All I picked up was, Mom doesn't believe me, she believes him. He doesn't believe me, he believes my sisters, who are just making shit up because they're 4 years old.
Right.
So I can't trust either of them. So once that started to take hold, I learned through the School of Hard Knocks how to lie more effectively, how to lie to survive. I also started learning that there's no reason to be honest first. There's a reason to be cagey and kind of distant and aloof first, and then over time decide if somebody has earned your trust or not earned your trust. So I started understanding that secrets were valuable, and I started understanding that I had the ability to control secrets. And then as I got into like my teenage years in public school, you start realizing that other people, they don't keep secrets at all. Other people are very transparent and they're very open. And then I started realizing, like, if you if you keep good secrets and you're around somebody who can't keep a secret, then you have tons of information that you can use for whatever you want to use it for. Whether you want to use it to get laid, or whether you want to use it to get ahead on a test, or whether you want to use it to get a teacher in your pocket, like whatever you want to do.
So you saw the advantage of being able to keep your mouth shut kind of early on and not trusting people. But man, that is a rough way to grow up. And I'm wondering, surely you're taking steps to make sure you don't wire your own kids the same way.
Correct. Yeah,
Okay.
and that's again something else that I think all parents do. Well, I'll be honest. I don't think all parents are aware
No.
of how their childhood impacts them as adults. So then oftentimes what happens is parents will replicate the same way they were parented with their own children. My wife and I were benefited because my wife grew up in a similar household to mine, where she also learned early she couldn't trust what her parents said, because what they did was different than what they said.
Interesting.
The big difference between she and I is that she didn't trust her parents and what they said, but she did trust that they loved her. Whereas for me, I didn't trust what they said, and I didn't actually trust that they loved me. I kind of still wonder if my mom could have changed her decision in 1980, would she have changed her decision in 1980?
Have you asked her that?
My mom doesn't tell the truth. So,
right. So what's the point?
So I have asked her, I have made the suggestion that maybe she would have chosen not to have me. She's always like, no, baby, I would have had you. But at the same time, there are pictures of her taking me to abortion rallies when I'm 3, 4, and 5 years old.
Oh, that's interesting.
So I don't know what, I'm glad that she was there, sponsoring women's power and women's rights, but it's got to be a little f***ed up to be like, here's my 3-year-old, and I think you should be able to take your baby's life if you want to.
That's interesting. That's an interesting perspective.
It's her choice, but it is really interesting to me when she tries to tell me that, of course, she would have had me at 19 years old with no husband and all that other stuff. That's tough.
That is tough. And what it seems like what she's saying is, no, I really love you and I'm so glad you're in my life. But if you were able to go back in time and say, you can turn this pregnancy off with a light switch, she would probably go, oh my God, I'm a kid. What am I doing?
Right. It's a hard call. And that's, whenever the topic of abortion comes up, for me, I'm very sensitive to it, not in an emotional way, but this is why, whatever your politics are, I believe women should have a choice. Because my mom had a choice. At whatever level, she had a choice, and she chose to give me a chance. And I was not an easy child. I was a sickly child when I was born.
Oh, really?
I had some
Look like
health
you're in good
issues
shape now.
because I was able to recover because my mom had me, and there was a hospital that took care of me, and there was modern day medicine, and I was in the United States. So, but it's tough, man. It's a sticky situation.
That's interesting. It's interesting you grew up not trusting your parents. Because I can't. Most people many people listening just can't relate to that at all.
Really, you trusted your parents?
Yeah, trusted my parents. Even my dad. It's funny because my dad and we have a good relationship. I want everybody to know. I just talked with him, but he's like a really terrible communicator. It's comical. It is. So I trusted him insofar that we all understood what the hell he was even talking about at any point in time, but he wasn't a guy who was gonna my parents were. You could rely on them as well. Being able to trust somebody and rely on them are two totally different things, I guess, as well. But yeah, I trusted my parents, and and our relationship is really good as a result.
That's awesome, man. That's a beautiful thing. And that's what I'm hoping will happen with my kids.
I'm sure it will if you're actively cultivating it. How old are your kids now?
I have an 11-year-old son and I have a 6-year-old
You
daughter.
would have screwed this up already, I'm pretty sure. Right? Come on. Mine are younger, so who knows, but you still have time to screw it up if you try.
It's true.
But I think if you're focused on this and you haven't already messed it up, you're probably doing okay.
My poor children, I have to give them credit. And one day I'm hoping there'll be adults listening to this interview, right? They're raised by 2 spies. Their mom and their dad are 2 professionally trained liars. We're not only trained to tell lies, but we're trained to identify when we're being lied to.
Yeah, sucks for them.
Well, what's wild is it sucks for them because it's tough for them to come up with a fabrication.
Right.
But they're also essentially modeling us, so they're going to be really good.
That's true. You got to be careful they don't misuse that. With great power comes great responsibility and all that.
Yeah. So I'm very fortunate because we have our son does not even like to try to lie because he's been caught so many times, but our daughter is fearless, and she really is hard to read sometimes. Sometimes you're like, I think you're lying, but I don't know.
Yeah, go hook yourself up to the machine. I'll be in a few minutes.
Sit on the pad.
Yeah, sit on the pad. No, I know you have a thumbtack in your shoe. Take the shoe off. that doesn't work anyway, from what I understand.
No, it's a baseline thing, but I'm with you.
Yeah, I think I did an episode a long time ago on polygraph, and I had to remove it because the guy was an expert circa 1975, and a guy from the State Department was like, the beginning of my career, we didn't even have that anymore. Like, that guy was an expert on the polygraph when they invented it in 1965 or whatever, but now it's like, he's like, I'd love it if somebody puts a thumbtack in their shoe. We see it immediately on the graph, and then we know that they're trying to beat the test, and then we know that they immediately fail. So he's like, those are the quick, that's an early lunch for me.
Yeah.
So meanward, it's like this other guy wrote a whole book on it.
Well, I'm sorry, I don't want to dwell forever on that, but
please.
I think that's so interesting, right? There's so much interest in how to beat a polygraph.
Yep.
And what's fascinating to me is like the polygraph is the exact right time to just lay it all out there.
Mm-hmm.
Like if you want something so bad that it requires a polygraph to get there, you want to just go in and comply.
Mm-hmm.
Because if you comply, it's hard for the polygrapher to determine whether you're being honest or not. Because normal honesty makes you sweat. It changes your heart rate. It makes you uncomfortable. Like real, genuine honesty makes them have to work. Actual dishonesty comes much easier than honesty. So polygraphers don't have to work as hard.
That's interesting. So if somebody's like, have you ever looked at joining an organization that's hostile to the United States? You're like, so in high school.
Yes, exactly.
This is awkward.
Yes.
But I was just curious, and they're like, crap, I was hoping you would lie about that because then I can see the thing go like that. And you're like,
Exactly.
Meanwhile, you're just like, this is the dumbest, what's the dumbest thing you've ever done? And you're like, oh, really? All right, here we go.
So a big deal. So I had to take the polygraph. There's the way that they execute the polygraph, or at least the way they did when I was being recruited. It was multi-days. So day one you would come in, but they would make you reserve a second day just in case you needed to come back for a second day. Mm-hmm. Well, to me, I was like, oh, if I'm honest on day one, I won't have to come back on day two because they'll see that I'm being honest. Well, then I learned long after I was recruited, long after I was a successful officer, the second day is really there for the people who are honest. The second day is not there for the people who are dishonest, because dishonest people get identified quickly and boom, they're out the door.
Okay.
But honest people are the ones that have all the variation from baseline, because that shit is uncomfortable. For me, the thing that got me hooked, like the thing that was my second day clause, was they asked me if I'd ever taken controlled substances. Now, I've never taken a drug. I've never taken a narcotic. I've never smoked marijuana. I can't wait until I get the chance to do it. But I married a woman. Yeah. I married a woman who did drugs in high school and college, and she was like, now that we're married, I'm not letting you do that until we're like 75 years old. And
I would say you're not missing a whole lot.
And that's what a lot of people tell me these days, but I don't know what I'm missing, so I'm kind of jealous. My point is, when I was in the military and I was sitting underground at the missile silos, it was considered under UCMJ a controlled substance, even if it was over the counter, if it had a sleep aid or if it had a painkiller.
Oh, man.
Because they don't want somebody on a sleep aid underground.
That makes sense. So can't wake you up for the drill.
Correct. So they drilled that into us in the military. Well, then when I go to do my polygraph for CIA, they're like, have you ever taken a controlled substance? And I'm just like what you just said. I want to be honest. I'm like, well, technically, I used to take Tylenol PM with me on alert underground, even though I knew I shouldn't have it, because I didn't want to be the guy that called in sick and sent somebody else underground. Yeah. So just in case I needed it, I would take it with me, and I would share it with the person that I was underground with, and once or twice I took it myself, but I don't know if that counts. Well, the polygrapher was like, you just ruined my day, dude, because now I don't know if that's controlled or not, and then I turned into a whole second day of deeper digging into, like, have you taken cocaine? Have you taken heroin? Have you done this? Have you done that? How many times have you seen marijuana? And I remember being like sweating in my seat, being like, well, there was this one time at band camp where my friend who plays the baritone was smoking a joint and he was offering it to me, and I thought maybe I should take it. Like, it was the most humiliating, like, I feel like a bad guy.
It was oregano in the first place. It wasn't even weed. He was 13. How do you think he got weed? It was bullshit.
So it's just so funny. That's what a real polygraph looks like. Sticking a thumbtack in your shoe is not going to change that.
Right. No, you're just sitting there talking about how much of a loser you were in high school. No. The biggest bender was a Tylenol PM bender in 1998. God.
That qualifies you for CIA.
That's really funny. That's really funny. So you said when you were getting recruited, how did you get recruited? You went to the Air Force. Did they pluck you from the the high-performing ranks of those that dwell underground, or was it like a career shift after you got out?
It was a career shift for sure. So
Okay.
I was a mediocre officer. Like, in my opinion, I was a mediocre Air Force officer.
Well, that's why they put you in a bin underground.
For real, right?
They're not sending their best.
And when the time came
Yeah.
to leave the Air Force, I started looking for a job.
Okay.
Right? And one of the things that I wanted to do was get as far away from nuclear weapons as possible.
Mm-hmm.
Plus, at 27 years old, I was really into having sex.
Oh,
so
that's
I was
surprising.
like, how do I find a career field that's also like easy to find women? So I looked at going to the Peace Corps.
Oh, I've really wanted to join. I regret not having done that.
So just knowing that you went to law school and knowing that you were courted by CIA, I'm not surprised at all to hear.
Is there like a Venn diagram overlap?
Huge overlap.
Should I spy and ruin other people's lives, or should I be in the Peace Corps and help other people's lives?
I mean, think about
coin
it.
Flip.
Yeah, if you're willing to put yourself in car, living in a tent, helping people with microfinance, think about all the things that you're willing to give up.
Yeah. I would have loved to have lived in, like Central African Republic, Congo, like just some crazy place.
Yep. Well, guess what CIA is looking for?
Yeah, right. The same.
The same person. People who are willing to give it all up, only instead of helping people with microfinance, you're going to steal secrets about how the Russians are helping people with microfinance. You know what I mean? That's essentially,
Sure.
it's the same person. It's just ideologically, there's some nuance there between the two of them.
Yeah.
If they're pragmatic enough to be like, oh, you're going to put me in a tuxedo and possibly also send me to like Albania and I'm going to have like a chance to steal. I'm open to the idea of stealing, where a true Peace Corps person would never steal. Ideologically,
Yeah.
they would never even take you seriously if you were like, how would you feel about stealing secrets? They're going to be like, that's wrong.
Yeah, no, I definitely fall on the other side of this Venn diagram. As long as I won't get in trouble for it.
I will steal
That's where-
secrets all day long.
Yeah, man. It's worth it because America.
Because America.
Yes.
Because of freedom.
Freedom said
Freedom for me means I can take freedom from them.
Freedom says I'm supposed to blackmail you. I'm sorry. That's just how it is.
That's what makes
Yeah.
That's what makes a good CIA officer. So I was leaving the Air Force, trying to go the exact opposite direction, trying to I tell people all the time, all I wanted was to have tent sex with hippie chicks while helping children that were starving. That's
And
what I
instead
was.
you got air-conditioned sex with God knows, yeah. Kids can't talk about it. Yeah, exactly. But at least you had air conditioning.
But it's important to highlight, like, because of the overlap in the Venn diagram, CIA has a strict policy where it does not recruit or accept applicants who have ever served in the Peace Corps.
Well,
and the Peace Corps has the same strict rules about never accepting applicants who have served with CIA.
so CIA definitely disqualifies you from the Peace Corps for life. However, CIA will recruit after the Peace Corps if enough time has elapsed and under certain circumstances.
interesting. I didn't know that.
I looked it up before you came over. That's not just something that's in the back of my brain. I looked that up because I thought, I wonder if you can still
Yeah.
join the Peace Corps. The answer is no. But if you join the Peace Corps first, then maybe 10 years later, you join the CIA and you end up back there. But I would imagine they would not. That's a sticky one, man.
It's a sticky one.
Because if they put you in as an aid worker, they endanger every aid
Correct.
worker, which is, I think, why they typically don't do that. But it's not a complete. The CIA will just do whatever the hell they need to do.
When it comes down to it,
Yeah.
and I love that you have that rationale. Like,
Yeah.
when it comes down to it, the CIA is an agency of last resort. If it can be done by anybody else, somebody else should do it. But
Yeah.
only when nobody else can do it does CIA get called in.
I would imagine the Peace Corps folks are not fans.
No.
Because your existence endangers their lives
Yeah.
every single day, basically.
Really, outside of CIA, nobody's a fan of CIA, which is why,
That's true.
I mean, even the American people don't trust CIA.
Yeah.
So for sure, DIA doesn't like us, FBI doesn't like us, State Department doesn't like us, Health and Human Services don't like us, IRS doesn't like us. Nobody likes us because anytime we do anything, just like you said, we are causing people to question the purpose of anyone else's role.
The diplomats in the embassy in Panama were split on this. Us younger guys were like, whoa, that's the CIA, one of the CIA guys. And then we were like, he's really normal and kind of boring. But then there were other older guys who were like, yeah, not impressed. Because when they go to a meeting and everyone's like, you're a spy, I don't trust you. You're like, God, I've been here for 20 years. I am not a spy. I am the commercial attaché. Can we please just get this done?
Can we get
No,
past
you're a
this?
spy. And it's just like, thanks a lot, CIA, for existing. Yeah, there was a little bit of that.
And it's a problem.
Yeah.
It's a problem, and it's a problem that existed long before there was, media, and it's a problem that will exist long into the future. Because the concept here is that once you give someone a reason not to trust you, it's impossible to earn that trust back. Right? That's the real lesson here. So what CIA is it's a constant thorn reminding people around the world not to trust the United States. So they always come to a meeting with anybody and they're like, that could be a spy.
Even when I lived especially when I lived in Serbia, everybody, even my closest friends were like, we would be super, super drunk and they'd go, okay, you gotta, dude, just tell me. You're a spy, right? No. Come on, man. Why would you come live here, of all places? It doesn't make any sense. They would just get so frustrated. It was very good-natured, but they were like, come on, just tell me.
Yeah.
I won't tell anyone. I gotta know. And I'm like, does our whole circle assume that I'm a spy? And they're like, yeah, of course. And I'm like, then why am I not getting more women? Because that's supposed to be a thing. They're like, yeah, hey, look, we're also equally mystified by your lack of success. Maybe you should tell us that you're a spy and it'll work. Yeah, there was a bit of that. So what is the CIA training like for the Directorate of Operations? I mean, I know you can't say much. I know other people that I can't mention here have told me about the existence of the farm, which is maybe the place that you go to learn some of this stuff. But what's the environment like?
So I do have to be a little bit careful here.
Obviously, yeah.
But there's a lot that we can still talk about. So I love that you called it the Director of Operations because its name changes. Essentially, what is currently the Director of Operations, when I was recruited, was called the National Clandestine Service, the NCS.
I see.
But that name changes depending on who needs a promotion at any given time because it's still a giant bureaucracy.
That's weird because I remember the document they gave me said DO on it.
It was DO until I think it was like 2004, 2005.
Oh, I see. So it was called that.
Under Porter Goss, maybe.
Gotcha.
It changed to NCS, and then it changed back to DO again under Brennan in 2000, maybe 16-ish.
That was after my flirtations with the agency.
But you see, I mean, it goes back and forth.
Yeah.
Either way, National Clandestine Service, Director of Operations, is the operational arm of clandestine operations around the world. Clandestine operations are what we technically call, what the media calls undercover operations or alias operations or whatever else. It's for us, they're all clandestine, secret, right? When you go through training for that operational cadre, you're taken to a location that's physically segregated from the rest of society. And they do that to control your entire experience during the training agenda. They essentially simulate what it's like to deploy to a foreign country. And then in that controlled environment, they teach you everything from the basics of social engineering, like how to introduce yourself and remember someone's name, how to read body language, how to identify a baseline or create human assessment, how to build a relationship that we call is a fictionalized or a fabricated relationship, meaning it's artificial, but they feel like it's real. So all of those like social skills are taught in addition to field triage, offensive and defensive and tactical driving, weapons handling, surveillance detection, you name it.
Do you know Jonna Mendez?
Yeah, Jonna Mendez.
Yeah. So she told me about learning how to ram through barricades with a car. They drop you into like a fake town where everybody speaks another language, and they tell them that they will pay you if you can catch our guys. And she told me how they have to like sneak through this whole thing, and people are out there looking because they get paid if they find you.
So, she's dated, obviously. What she went through was a different time period than what I went through.
Sure, this is Cold War. Like, this is probably in the 60s or 70s.
Right. But it's not that dissimilar now. The main thing that we do now is, since 9/11, they find as many ways. The Congress has made it very, very important for CIA and FBI and DIA and et cetera, to all work together. So even in our training at the farm and even in our initial training months, they force us to work together. So instead of being dropped into a foreign country or dropped into a place where strangers are trying to catch you, they'll drop us into a place where FBI trainees are trying to catch us.
I see.
So now you've got trained FBI surveillance teams who are trying to surveil trained, but it's trainee against trainee.
Israel does this too.
Yeah, the Shin Bet does it with Mossad.
Yeah, there's a really good book I think called The Way of Deception or something like that, and they talk about the police, not the regular police, but some sort of like domestic police in Israel, and then Shin Bet and then Mossad are all out trying to find each other. And there's like this little sort of whiteboard tally going on, and it's like it seems good-ish natured, but it's serious business because if they get caught anywhere around Israel, they get shot for it, or if they're lucky.
Oh,
right.
Well, I mean, not with each other.
No. If they do it in Lebanon and they screw up, they get hung by a lamppost or something. So they're always trying to sharpen each other's axes.
And that's exactly what, I mean, everybody refers back to biblical principles, right? Iron sharpening iron. That's exactly what it is at a trainee level. Well, the other thing it does is it makes it so that I meet my surveillance teams at the end of training and they're FBI trainees. Well, then 10 years later, when I'm in charge of an office and they're in charge of an office and we are on a joint task force, it's like, oh, hey, I remember you. You and I worked together in XYZ city where you caught me or where I escaped you or whatever else it might be.
Interesting. Yeah, I know one of the things I do to confirm people who say they worked for an agency is show them a picture because y'all don't know each other's names. So I'll ask a friend, I'll say, do you know this guy? And she'll go, once again, I have no idea. And I'm like, this guy. And I have to like pull up a picture on the phone. And she's like, let me send this to somebody else because he probably was deployed in this region. And then it's like Daryl Blocker. Yep. Oh, yeah, I know this guy. Didn't have the same name back then, but now, his name is Andrew. He doesn't look like an Andrew. Like, there's a few of those that happened over time, which I think is kind of funny. Like, her name is Aaron? Man, I should never would have. I had a lot of guesses, but it was never Aaron.
Yeah, we all had different names inside. And then when we have names upon names upon names, and it's difficult. It's I mean, my actual official record of performance at the farm isn't in my name. So like even official government documentation about my performance is not in my name. So
when they're looking for people who they're going to recruit, you ever seen Men in Black? Remember when Will Smith goes in and it's all like the Air Force graduate and the Army graduate and then Tommy Lee Jones is like, trust me, I've seen him in action. And Will Smith is like writing it uncomfortably and he just takes the table and he goes, and moves it closer and everyone's staring at him because he's like this. The whole point of the scene is to show that he's this outside of the box thinker. Like, there are rules in this room, but I'm not going to follow them. I'm going to talk with people even though everyone's serious and silent and move the table and change the environment to fit me. Is that remotely what they're looking for? Or are they kind of like, no thanks, we don't need independent thinkers?
You know, they do want independent thinkers only in certain job categories, though.
I see.
So remember how I told you there's a whole list of job categories? Well, what ends up happening is during your first round of interviews, it's fairly routine. People who are up for and there's also a huge pool of people who go to first interviews. If you really ask your peer network, to be honest, you'd be surprised. Most people are probably one or two people away from someone who did go to a first round interview with an intelligence service. It's not super rare, but the whole purpose of that first round interview is really just to see whether or not you'd be a good fit for Intel and then what category you might fit into.
I see.
So during that first round interview, you've got analysts and tech officers and linguists who are all sitting in the same room and they're all going through the same 25 questions. But then if they fit the behavior model of a CIA officer, then the person interviewing them will basically say, this person might be a good analyst, this person might be a good case officer, this person might be a good linguist. Then the second round of interviews, and this is dated 2007-ish, right? The second round of interviews is when you actually go through the personality battery, which is 2 full days of personality testing and assessment. What that does is it identifies, would you actually be good at a case officer or a SU or a targeting officer or a tech officer? Would you actually personality-wise be good at that job?
What about an ENTJ asking for a friend?
So ENTJs actually make fantastic mission planners and really effective tech ops officers because the J means that you follow a system. But without a system, Js get lost a lot of the time.
Oh, interesting.
Where ENTPs don't have they are very comfortable without a system. So they end up making very good case officers, right? But the Js, I mean, even if you think about just look at the metrics, ENTJs, carte blanche, by a long margin, are the most successful people in America because they follow a system. Once they find a system that works, they just repeat that system over and over again, where ENTPs do not. The ENTPs find a working system and they still try something different.
Yeah, interesting. My son I was talking about this with my wife in the car. He does this really interesting thing that shows me how his brain works because he's 4. He doesn't have a lot of he hasn't been beaten down by public education yet. So he'll play a game on the iPad, right? And it's a game where you build things out of Legos or something like that, and he's doing this. And I go, why are you dragging all the pieces in different parts of the screen instead of building? He goes, I just want to see what's going to happen. And then whenever we play with things, he's like, what happens if I do this instead? And I'm like, well, that would break the thing. And he goes, well, how? Then what happens? And then how do you fix it? And I'm just like, oh, he's always looking to, he's like, he sees the edges of whatever it is, and then he's like, I'm going to pop that bubble and see if there's room around it's very interesting to watch, because my daughter is very much like, this is how you do this game. And she's 2, so it's a little early, but she's like, this is how you play the game. You build the thing. That's it. You don't try to test the outsides of the boundaries. She's like, you push the right answer. You don't push all the wrong answers to see if the colors change, which is what my son does. And then we go, you know this answer. Why did you push that? I just want to see what would happen. She's like, I don't know the answer. I'm going to hit it. So it's really, it's interesting to see how different their brains are.
And that's more in line with answering your original question, right? So do they put analysts and case officers and tech officers all in the same room and then make their behavior in the room part of the test? No. They'll test to see what you fit into, and then they'll put a bunch of tech officers, a bunch of case officers, a bunch of analysts. They'll all go into the same room. And then inside that room, everybody just behaves the same way. In the tech officer's room, you're going to have people who studiously do whatever and who show up in like t-shirts and shorts because they're kind of socially awkward for the most part because they're so heavily focused on engineering.
I feel seen.
But inside the case officer room, those are all the people who are like super jocks, and they're all wearing shirts unbuttoned to the 3rd button, and they're like sitting back and whatever else, and they're pulling tables, but they're all doing it. So it makes them all feel like they're all winning, because they're all with each other, and they feel like, oh, I must be elevated into a group of peers.
Interesting.
They don't realize that what actually matters is not their behavior in the room, but the results of the task they're being given.
That's sort of status jockeying stuff. I let those guys play that game. Maybe I'm too old for it, but I'm like, you know what? You guys can dick measure over there. I can't handle that. Maybe I wouldn't have fit in after all. I've heard that the parking at the CIA headquarters is horrible.
Atrocious.
It's so funny because you get these people with insane stories, but since they can't talk about 99% of it, they just bitch about the parking.
They bitch about the parking lot.
Yeah.
And I mean, there's a lot of stupid stuff that America doesn't realize about CIA that shows it is a government institution.
Yeah.
Just like the DMV, just like the IRS, right? Just like the VA. It's just as broken and flawed. And the parking situation is one of them. You have to, I mean, I'm sure you've heard a million times in the past, but just to summarize it, parking lot's gigantic.
Yeah.
It wraps around both the old and the new headquarters building. And depending on what time you show up, or like the level of authority that you carry, you end up parking very far away. And then for me, like for people like me, I learned to come in, I hacked the system because when I started dating my wife, who was also a CIA officer, it only takes 2 people before you're considered a carpool. And there's very specific carpool parking that's right by the front entrance.
Sure.
So now when I started dating my wife, we would carpool in together, park right by the front entrance, and save ourselves 15 minutes of walking.
Yeah.
But when you drive in alone and you get there after 8 a.m., you're basically in like the nosebleed seats.
That's funny. Yeah, so like I can just see you guys dating. You're like, you know what? I'm not crazy about you, but this parking is unbeatable.
Sweet. Yes.
We should just get married and make a thing out of it.
In the basement of the new headquarters building, there's a hot dog machine. Like, I don't know, have you heard that before?
No.
I love this because people don't realize it. My wife adores the story because it's so gross. It is a hot dog machine, which means...
What is that?
It's a vending machine.
That is gross.
So you
it's
walk
already
in,
gross.
yes, you put in like your $1.50 or whatever, and no shit, a cold wiener comes out, goes onto like a little rack that microwaves it basically on a roller, and then out of nowhere comes like a singularly wrapped bun, and the 2 things are like dropped into each other, and then like spit out the bottom on like a little paper tray.
You know, it's probably not worse than any other hot dog you eat, honestly.
Except that it's a CIA hot dog machine. And the fact that it's in the basement just makes it that much funnier because now you realize who must be using that machine. It's all the poor bastards who have to work in the basement after the cafeteria area closes, which closes at like 5 o'clock in the afternoon. So all those poor assholes that are working at like 1 o'clock in the morning and hungry, they only have a hot dog machine.
So our national defense, like people analyzing Al-Qaeda and ISIS communications are like, guess I'm going to go eat another hot dog until I get a new job.
Yep. And then that also means that the operations center must just smell like hot dog fart.
Yeah.
All the time.
Constant hot dog farts. The lie detection stuff, I've heard, you know, Joe Navarro is, he's former FBI. He's former FBI, wrote a lot of books on deception. but he told me, he was on this show, I can't remember the episode number, but he told me, he's like, all these people that think they can detect lies, especially the YouTube crowd, it's just BS.
I agree.
You agree?
I completely agree. I completely agree because so micro expressions and the mastery of micro expression, it's real. But the problem is that it takes a very specific environment for that stuff to work. And I'm so glad you're bringing this up, right? And I'm so glad to know that Joe is out there telling the truth about this because it is such bullshit. When you hear certain experts talk about micro expressions and reading someone's face, they are assuming it's happening in an interrogation setting. And in an interrogation setting, you control the environment and the poor bastards sitting across from you cannot leave. They're a captive audience. They have to have this conversation. And you control what they eat, what they drink, the temperature in the room, the smell. You control everything long before...
I won't ask how they control the smell.
Long before you ever start having an actual interrogation where there's two people usually in the interrogation, swapping questions so that both can watch the micro expressions, because it's very hard to identify someone's blink rate or someone's eyebrow movements or it's hard. It's just hard to do if you're having an engaged conversation. Field operations and the kind of shit that 90%, 99% of people do, you're not in a captive audience. That person can leave. You don't control the temperature of the room. You don't control what they ate in the morning or when they showed up for them. You don't control it. So they could be looking up to the upper left-hand corner just because they saw a bird flying by.
Right.
They could be...
Oh, the eye thing is always such BS. Every time I'm on a YouTube video, there's a comment like, he looked up and to the right, he must be lying. And I'm like, dude, there's a freaking camera up there, or there's an audience with an upper row. I'm looking at the person who sneezed. You're not reading my body language, you numbskull.
Furrowing an eyebrow could be because they were confused or because they felt a breeze on their head or any number of things that you can't control. So the whole idea of mastering this lie detection through visual identification of behaviors only applies if you're in a controlled environment. The second place where it applies is if you have a standing relationship, what's known as a baseline, with the person.
This is why your mom knows, well, except for you and your kids because they're spy progeny, but most people, you kind of know when your kid's lying because you have a 30, 20, 10, whatever year-long baseline on them, so you know that they're being kind of weird. You're not looking at me.
It's why husbands know when their wives are lying, even when their wives say,
Vice
I'm
versa.
Fine.
Yeah,
They're
I'm fine.
Well,
that's also not that coded in. That's not that, they're not trying to hide shit. By the way, pro tip, she's not fine. But Jen will be like, if she's like, hey, do you like that? I'm like, yeah. She's like, no, you don't. Because you're not talking.
Baseline.
And when you don't talk while you're eating, it means you don't like the food. Stuff I don't even notice about myself. She's like, no, I know. I know you don't like that. I can tell.
Yeah, I mean, if I could turn all that shit off with a light switch, it would be awesome. Yeah. Because all it's doing is it's dumbing Americans down. It's distracting them from actual skills. Knowing when you're being lied to is such a useful skill, and you can actually master that skill. But you will not master that skill if you're worried about micro expressions in the face or blink rates. It's just not going to happen.
What does it take to master that type of skill? Learning how to essentially interrogate somebody?
Well, it's not interrogation because they're not a captive audience.
Right.
What you have to do is you have to learn how to assess verbal and nonverbal cues.
Okay.
And that's something that we teach. My company teaches that. I teach that to people all the time.
Cool.
It's just a matter of understanding how people work, how the brain works, and how people respond to different types of questions. And then you just kind of set up a system of asking certain types of questions and seeing what the response is and how that response varies from the baseline that was set the last time you asked that kind of question.
It's interesting. I would love to get into more of that in a future episode for sure. There's one, Dr. Daniel Lieberman. Do you know who he is?
I've heard that name
Man,
too.
he's so good at this. And one of the tricks that I remember from his episode, I should re-listen to my own episode. One of the tricks I remember was he said, when you think somebody's lying to you, fill in the reason that they did the thing. So if it's like your teenager was late, why were you late coming home? Was it because of the water main break? Right? Instead of why were you late coming home, and they're like, no reason. You say, was it because of the water main break? And then what a liar will do is hesitate because they're like, shit, should I agree with that? Or should I disagree with that? And that hesitation shows you they're lying. But if they're not lying, you go, were you late? Were you late because of the water main break? I don't know. There was just a shitload of traffic. That's all. Is there a water main break? Is that why there was traffic? They're probably not lying. But the hesitation, which you really cannot turn off manually unless you are extremely skilled, That's the killer, and that's the indicator.
I mean, a similar example to that is asking people what we call emotional questions. Ask someone how they feel, because you know what happens is when you ask someone how they feel, they recall the feeling, right? Like, how did you feel when your son was born? Like, you know exactly how you felt.
Sure.
It's on your face that you can remember exactly how you feel.
I'm trying really hard not to smile with this part of the conversation. I was like, I'm going to throw him a curveball and not do anything. Like, dang, this guy's a cold bastard. Doesn't even care when his son was born.
But what ends up happening is when when you ask an emotional question, the first response is always the true response. Like,
I see.
You can see it in their face that they're remembering the real feeling. But then the hesitation is when they assess, should I tell them the real feeling or should I make a different feeling up? And then you can see that transition too. Because you can see from the relaxed face to the thoughtful face to then they make a decision and then they actually say something.
You know, it's interesting that it's also hesitation based. I mean, maybe this just happens to be because it's also hesitation, the example I gave you.
That's what made me realize.
I
that's
see.
what made me come up with the example. Like, that hesitation is a true tell.
It's really hard to break it, right? So it's a true tell. Yeah, that does make sense. That's an interesting point. It's very, even if you are, because I'm like, okay, I'm going to get tricky with this Lieberman thing, this little technique. It is very difficult. You have to rehearse that lie and think of all these different things they might ask you, or you have to decide, I'm going to say this no matter what, but if it doesn't make sense, then it's weird as hell.
And that's what you're looking for.
Right, and you're looking for that too, if you're smart. Yeah, that's fascinating. Thanks for watching us on YouTube. Remember, you can also enjoy The Jordan Harbinger Show on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or wherever you listen to podcasts. Our podcast feed is a treasure trove of insights from intellectuals, authors, spies, artists, athletes, pioneers, engineers, former mafia bosses, and business leaders, all sharing their amazing stories and secrets to success. For more information, click the link in the description. Now, back to the show. I watched that video where you were analyzing Mission Impossible.
Oh my gosh.
Oh, that was so funny. I wonder if I for sure have some questions on that. I gotta figure this out.
I'm glad you enjoyed that.
Oh yeah, in that video, there's one part where they show, I can't remember if this is also Mission Impossible, but they show him working on a team, and it's like,
You may select any 2 team members, but it is essential that the 3rd team member be Naya Nordorf Hall. She is a civilian.
I expected you to go, yeah, we don't pair them up with random folks, but apparently that's not correct. Apparently that is something that happens.
Yeah,
Tell
I mean,
me about
they'll pair you up with random people who are vetted by them because they want the team to work together. You got to understand that when CIA builds a team, they're not looking for teamwork. What they're looking for is a mix of skill sets and personality fit, because they already know if you're going to work or not based on your personality and your behaviors. And they also know that a high-performance team has conflict baked in. So when they build a team, like, it doesn't matter what you think you want because they know what will biologically work. So that's why they can pair you up with somebody who's completely strange, like a complete stranger to you, but vetted by them, because they know under pressure the two of you are going to jive. Or they know that under pressure the two of you are going to have conflict, but then there's this third person or fourth person on the team that's going to resolve that conflict, and that makes you a high-performance team.
That's interesting.
The big mistake that most people make is they build teams of people who will get along. If you build a team of people who will get along, that's how all the bad ideas get elevated to the top.
Oof.
Because it's like, I like you and I don't want to disagree with you, so I'm going to say yes to your bad idea. Even though I have a better idea, I'll keep quiet about it.
Yeah, I'm going to butcher this analogy here, but do you ever see that movie about Queen? I forget what it's called. I think it's called Bohemian Rhapsody or something.
I haven't seen that.
It's pretty good. I'm not a huge music guy or whatever, but there's a part where Rami Malek, he goes off and he does his own thing because they're not getting along, right? And then he goes back to them, I don't know, however many years later. And he goes, the problem is not that what those guys, with the new band didn't do what I wanted them to do. The problem is they just did whatever I wanted them to do. Whereas the old band, they were like, no, we're going to do this riff. And he would get so mad because he's like, it's my idea. But the music was crap. ish, I guess. People are going to email me about how that was the best era. I don't care. You're ruining my metaphor. You're ruining my analogy. The idea was when the bassist or the guitarist or the drummer was like, I want to do this. This is the right thing to do in this situation. That was like where the gold came out. That was the magic. It wasn't just about what he wanted, but when he got whatever he wanted, it just wasn't that good. It's very similar to what you're saying about the team.
Absolutely. And the difference is that, CIA is pulling from decades of industry secrets in the intelligence world and an unlimited budget that they use to hire the most modern day current psychology and education that's out there. They're pulling from both to make sure that their team always has an edge over their adversaries. That's the way it works. So when CIA builds a team and they build a team for conflict, and then you're put on the team, you already know to expect, I'm not going to get along with everybody on the team, but I don't have to. My job is not to get along. My job is to make sure that in this AOR or in this technical expertise or in this planning piece, I stand my ground. And then everybody has to work together. And then there's usually somebody who's kind of what we call the lion of the group. There's some lion who ultimately has to make the final decision.
It would be so fun to be one of the psychologists or psychiatrists who's like, these two people, they are going to really not get along, and this is going to be a fun read, folks. This is going to be a fun watch, however they're monitoring you. Because it's like Andrew and her, nails meet chalkboard, right? And they're just like waiting for you. You're going and they're like, I got this. And it's just like, nope, this person is going to push every single one of your buttons and then put more buttons in that you didn't know were there and push those even harder. It's like, oh, that would just be so fun.
Yeah, I mean, you're not wrong, except that we are all under a time constraint. So if we actually had space and time to enjoy watching the show, we probably would. But instead, we're all thrown in there and we're like, we've got 72 hours to make this thing happen. No one's going to sleep. We're all going to argue. But at the end of 72 hours, the op will either be successful and we'll all fist bump each other and be happy to meet each other, or the op will be a failure and we're all going to be like, we all failed.
Yeah.
It wasn't Susan's fault. It was all of us.
Well, there's a lab certainly where they test these things. So that's the fun part, right? Because the stakes are lower. You're just trying to see if you can piss people off enough that they do their best work. Teach me how to be a better liar. I am a freaking terrible liar. There's probably not a situation, actually that's a lie too. There's probably a situation in which I should become a better one. I'm curious. And a lot of people reading or listening and watching, let me retake that. No one's reading this. Maybe there's a few deaf people reading this, but people watching and listening, they're for sure everybody wants to know how to be a better liar. Like, oh, it takes a lot of work to detect lies. Okay, how do I just lie better? Yeah. Certainly that's easier.
Yeah, it is, and that's a great point. Learning how to lie is much easier than learning how to detect liars. And honestly, learning how to lie is really just a matter of aligning your rational and your emotional brain, your left and right hemispheres. The thing that most people do wrong with lying is they don't pre-plan the lie. And then if they do pre-plan the lie, they don't rehearse the lie. So what I mean by that is if you don't know the lie that you're telling, you just lie spontaneously, it's hard to remember that. It's hard to keep the facts straight when you have to recreate or recall the lie that you made in the moment, right? So trained liars do not spontaneously lie, because when you spontaneously lie, you don't know what your body's doing. You don't know what your face is doing. You don't know what you're going to say next, if it's going to be congruent with the lie that you just made. You don't know that in 7 days, you're going to remember the lie that you just had. So it's very dangerous and amateur to lie spontaneously.
I see.
Instead, you plan your lie in advance. Well, the next mistake people make is they don't practice the lie. So if you plan a lie, like if I'm in my head in the shower and I'm like, I'm going to tell my wife that I didn't spend $500 on furniture. Right? I'm going to lie to her. I'm not going to admit that I spent that money. I'm not going to do it. I'm just not going to do it. But you've never practiced saying the words, I didn't buy new furniture. You never practiced saying the words, oh, I did buy that couch, but it only cost $150. And because you haven't practiced saying it, there's a body-brain disconnect. So then when you actually go to say it, you stumble over your own words.
The thing is, Tom, yes, it was $500.
Right? And that's, so you have to premeditate your lie. You have to rehearse and actually build the muscle memory to state the lie. Those are the two fastest ways to become a very good liar.
Yeah, that makes sense. You see it with kids, man. They don't think about it ahead of time. Hopefully, they don't think about it too much ahead of time. They don't rehearse the lie. that stuff in the moment will get you every time.
And parents lie to their kids all the time, right? We lie to our kids all the time. We tell them that gum is going to rot their teeth, or that TV screens are going to rot their eyes, or whatever. And you know what we do? We say the exact same thing over and over again. I bet you can recall 5 or 7 things that your parents said to you, rote memory.
Yeah.
They said this all the time. They said, don't do this or this would happen. Don't do this or this would happen. That's them lying.
Don't make funny faces. It'll stay that way. That was one of the OG kind of cliches, right?
Yeah, but it becomes, muscle memory is built. So even though they know it's a lie, and even though you know it's a lie, they can't stop the brain-body connection from the muscle memory of just saying it over and over again. That's perfect when you're trying to actually lie. When you're trying to actually say, I got that couch at a discount, it cost $150. Like, you want to say that exact same phrase every single time anybody ever asks you about that couch.
Yeah. Bold of you to assume she's never going to check the credit card statement or whatever.
But that's what you do.
Right. Man, manipulation and motivation are 2 sides of the same coin. I've heard you say this in other interviews. What do you mean by that?
So when it comes to CIA and when it comes to human intelligence operations, people love to throw around the word manipulate.
Yeah.
And manipulation has such a negative connotation all over the world.
Yeah.
Like, people are like, oh, don't manipulate me. It's wrong to manipulate him. Don't manipulate her. Don't manipulate your kids. So manipulation has this strong negative connotation.
Okay.
But in reality, all manipulation is directing human behavior. Well, when you look and you consider motivation, what is motivation? Motivation is just directing human behavior. So they're both going for the same outcome. But motivation has this fantastic connotation.
Right.
Like, oh, you're a motivator. You're a motivational speaker.
Right. No, you're not a manipulator speaker. Nobody's hiring that guy.
You're not a manipulation speaker, exactly.
Right.
But they both do the same thing. It's all about getting people to do something, getting people to take some action. The thing that really makes motivation, and even at CIA, what we're taught is that motivation and manipulation are both useful tools to getting information. You just have to decide whether or not you want to use motivation or manipulation in any given moment, because the outcome is the same. The skills to apply it are the same. The only thing that's different is the actual way that you leverage those skills.
I see.
Manipulation is defined as getting people to take an action that's not in their best interest. That's manipulation.
Oh, so you just make it in their best interest to do something.
And then it's motivation. When I get you to do something that's good for me and bad for you, I manipulate you. When I get you to do something that's good for you and good for me, I just motivated you.
Right.
Right? I motivated you because you get something out of it.
It seems like the carrot is probably more powerful than the stick.
In most cases, we start with motivation. In fact, that is one of the core tenets of intelligence doctrine is start with motivation, right? Try to get people to do what's in their best interest first, because once you connect doing this task is in your best interest, every time you ask them to do it again, it's that much easier.
Right.
Right?
Right.
But when you...
Yeah, if you got to put a gun to someone's head, you got to put a gun to someone's head every single time.
And the gun has to get bigger, and the bullets have, you can't just use the same 9mm every time, because they're like, you've done this to me before.
Right, yeah.
Now it's like, oh, I've got 2 gunmen. Now I've got you in a private room with a sack over your head. Now, it just gets worse and worse.
That makes sense. There's an acronym for people who... I can't remember exactly what it is, but when you're talking about counterintelligence, it's like money... the motivators are like money, ideology... Coercion
and ego.
Okay. Yeah, I knew it was rice. So why do I think it's rice?
So rice is what I teach.
I see.
Rice is the most modern version of it.
Okay.
Mice is the pre-9/11 Cold War version of it.
Okay.
But it basically stands for the same thing, right? These are the 4 core motivations that make any of us do anything. Motivation or manipulation. And those 4 core motivations are reward.
Reward, yeah.
Ideology, coercion, and ego. Like, at any given time, if she offered you a special ice cream dessert, that might be enough to get you to cut the interview off early and go out to ice cream with your wife, right? That's reward. You are trying to do the best possible interview you can. That's why you have backup microphones. That's an example of ideology. Coercion is putting a bullet to someone's head, right?
Yeah.
Like you have to stay here or else I'm going to, fine you, whatever it is.
Okay.
That's coercion. Ego, you want to have the public see you a certain way. That's your public persona. That is ego. Not the same as egotistical. Egotistical means you have to be powerful and correct all the time, but you also have an ego. I mean, we just edited a part out of this interview because you accidentally said the word read and you were like, no one's actually going to read this.
Right.
That's part of your ego where you're like, I'm very particular and I want people to see that I want to deliver a product that is a particular type of product. That's
Leave
ego.
that in just to screw up. Jace, leave it in. Leave in me telling you to leave it in. So then it's back on me. That's how this works. Yeah, I think that would be funnier just to leave that whole thing in. Robert Hansen, famous trader, FBI.
Yep.
One of the things, he barely got paid. This dude threw his life and career away and got tons of people killed for like, I can't even remember, but it was a frickin' pittance. It was like jack squat. It was something you would never. Dude couldn't even buy a house with the money. I mean, it was that crappy. So the idea is he did it for ego. But this wasn't a public-facing thing. He did it for ego from what? Like his Russian handlers telling him how he was a smart boy?
No,
I don't really understand.
He did it because the ego was himself. He felt like the FBI had rejected his ideas.
Yeah.
They had marginalized his career, blah, 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 blah. So he wanted to get back at the FBI. When the Soviets came in, they were like, hey, we know how you can get back at the FBI. You can spy and give us the secrets that help us. And then we know you are one of the best. And you're going to be operating right under their nose. So that shows their incompetence. They can't even catch the person. And then as he was promoted to being the head of the CI division, looking for a Russian mole, who was him, it just magnified and amplified that ego, right? That's how it works. Because, and you know, what's really interesting is because he was so effective and understood how to reverse engineer a counterintelligence operation, he knew if they paid him too much, it would look suspicious. And then people would be turned on to that suspicion. So instead, he made sure that he was paid a very small amount, and then he would be able to take the money and get away with it, which just further kind of stroked his ego about how good he was.
Yeah, he just died in a Supermax. Rest in piss. The guy got so many people killed. How do you elicit what will motivate people in the first place? Like, look, maybe look, this guy is a simpleton. We can pay him. He's going to look cool, the end. Or if you're like, this guy is immune to money. He doesn't care about that. He just wants to make sure that his particular brand of, I don't know, fundamentalism is validated. Whatever. How do you elicit this kind of thing from the target?
So you're using the term illicit, which is a very specific term. For me, the word illicit or elicitation is an actual term. It's a skill. So I'm going to take it down that road because it's a very specific skill. What you're talking about is how are you able to assess a person's motivations by meeting with them. That's how I would rephrase your question.
Sure, yeah.
And then using the skills of elicitation are just one of the ways that you would assess that person. So let's start with something simple, right? So physical environment is the simplest way. Just by looking around this room, and the camera that's on you is probably the best camera to actually show it, I can see that you have the pictures of your children on the back wall.
Oh, I thought you were going to say I'm using the best camera. I was like, actually,
I can see that your home alarm system has pictures of your children.
Yeah.
Like, it's very clear to me that you are motivated, that there's an element of pride and motivation for your children and your family and your status as a father. Just because in this very modern, beautiful home where nothing is really on most of the walls, there's like 12 paintings by kids right over there.
That's right.
So your environment tells you a lot of what you need to know about the person. So that's before you even ask them a question. And then the next thing you want to do is you want to start eliciting information from them by asking them questions, and you want to try to focus your questions on things that will make them feel. Remember how we said earlier, if you want to tell if someone's lying, you ask feeling questions?
Right.
You ask feeling-based questions, right? So you say something like, I see that you have an animal fan in your family.
Yeah.
That emotional response right there just validated for me that you do, and you know who it is, and right now in your mind, you're picturing whoever that child is.
That's right.
Right? Well, now you're associating me with that child and you're associating the fact that I noticed enough to care.
There's a couple animal fans. The giraffe is my personal favorite. It's all neck. That thing would fall over in real life. I don't know if that's in the shot. Maybe it is. If not, we'll have to take one and place it in the YouTube video.
But my point is, that's how you start to elicit.
Right.
So you start from the environment. We call it macro to micro. I see the environment as a macro objective. I then pull something from the environment and ask a question that pertains to that specific macro item, and then I get a micro response. I get a smile, I get laughter, I get you volunteering information. I assumed only one child. You just told me that you have a couple. Well, you only have 2 children.
Right.
So now you just told me without me asking that you have 2 children who like animals. That is elicitation.
Yeah.
I didn't ask you. You volunteered that. And that was just because of us talking about the environment.
Yeah, talking for a living and getting people to talk for a living are very, well, I wish most hosts did this, but it's sort of 2 sides of the same coin. And people really, they want to tell you things. That's why I was wondering if you really do even need to elicit things from people, or if you can just wind them up and let them go.
You can't wind up everybody. That's the thing. You have to assess them to know how to even get them talking. I guarantee you've had interviews here where it was like pulling teeth out of them. To
Oh,
get them
for
to
sure.
talk.
Yeah.
That just shows that not everybody will talk. You have to find something that breaks down their barrier to sharing what's in their head. There are plenty of people out there who want to talk but don't feel comfortable talking. There's also people out there who live so much in their head, they think they're talking when they're really thinking.
Yeah. I've met those people are very difficult to deal with. Very much so. You ever dated anybody like that? It's weird, man.
That's why I have anybody who dates a true artist. I don't know how they make those relationships work.
It's very difficult. I know exactly what you're talking about. And they'll tell you something and they're using a name and you're like, who's Bob? Oh, it's the person who raised me. Your dad? Just say dad. What are you doing? Like, it's just so, I'm like, are you insane?
Yes, there's a whole running world in their head that you can see in their eyes that it's playing, but it's not coming out. Like,
no.
And they don't even realize they're not communicating well.
I know. As an ENTJ, I cannot deal with that shit. For me, like, looking at like an ISIS guy, for example, they will not shut the hell up about their ideology because it's the only thing they have aside from a rusted out AK-47 and a slave and chained up that they've kidnapped or something in Raqqa, right? So those guys, it seems like there's certain types of people like that are just really easy to read because their motivation, I mean, maybe it's a little bit more veiled, right? Like you think it's their ideology, but really they just want power because they were losers back in the UK. That's why they joined ISIS and ran off to Syria. Like it can be a little bit like that, but it seems like a lot of times the label on the jar is more or less accurate.
I would disagree, honestly.
Really?
Yeah, I would say that the label on the jar is the one thing you shouldn't trust.
Really? Okay.
Because to get to the place where somebody represents a larger cause, like think about your typical US soldier, right? If you were to have any private from any military, and like in the United States, if you had a brand new recruit from any of the 4 services, we'll throw the Coast Guard in.
Sure.
If you had any of them sit down in this chair and talk to you, they would all pretty much look the same.
Yeah.
They would probably all have the first response would be almost the same to all of your questions, right? Hoorah, America. America's the best, yada, yada.
That's not what I mean by label. I just mean the way that you detect it. I guess you're right. That phrasing is garbage. You're right. You would, if you were really looking at the label, you would say it's patriotism, but that's not what I would say.
Same thing is true for ISIS.
Yeah.
You look at the label, you think it's all about ideology.
Yeah, I wouldn't think that.
They've been radicalized, and they were radicalized because there was something in their background where they felt powerless, most likely.
Yeah.
But that thing that made them feel powerless could be different. This person's dad was killed by an American soldier. This person's mother was blown up in a bomb by the Israelis. This person's sister may have been raped by, the next door neighbor. Who knows what?
Yeah.
Something led to the chain of events that then ultimately radicalized them. But when you first talk to them, all you're going to get is ideology.
Yeah, no, this makes sense. I wish I could rephrase this because I've talked with a couple of those guys, and it's usually some sort of shame-derived crap. Like, I guess I shouldn't feel guilty because they're in ISIS, so I'll talk shit about them. But a lot of it is kind of like incel-adjacent bullshit, where it's like, oh, you literally were such a loser in life that you felt your best option was to escape to Syria to get purpose, to maybe find a wife, because the only way you were going to find a woman is at the end of a gun, and then to find some sort of like way to feel. It's basically they're like a mass shooter, except they traveled abroad to do it. That's really what it is. It's almost the same thing.
And I'm sure I'm gonna piss people off, but
good.
But
clicks.
You have to recognize the humanity of even a terrorist.
Yeah.
Like, were they a loser? Were they incel adjacent? it's not a stretch to say yes. But you also have to understand they were just people. They were just angry people. And we were all just angry people at some point. The difference was when you were there's a literal thing called the radicalization ladder. And we're taught the radicalization ladder specifically so that when we meet a radical, we can reverse engineer the ladder.
Yeah.
It all starts, the very first step in a radicalization ladder is identifying people who feel like they have had an injustice. All of us at some point in our life felt like we had an injustice. Mom, dad, teachers, whatever, grandparents, wealth, everybody feels at some point like they had an injustice. What ends up happening, especially in the third world, is that the people who have experienced injustice there, they are surrounded by other people who are suffering from the same injustice. So for me, when my father died and I didn't have a dad, that felt like an injustice. But I didn't really have anybody else in my immediate network who could relate to that injustice. And just like, I've had friends who were when they were young. There's not a lot of people in their circle who had the same injustice. So what ends up happening is you're immediately reminded that your injustice is very personal to you.
Yeah, your shame as well. Yeah.
Well, and you might be ashamed of it, but you start to realize that other people don't judge you for it. But when you talk about like poor people in Syria, like impoverished people in Syria, which again, the UK extremist who's converted to ISIS is rare. He's an outlier. But the person who comes from Syria who's radicalized to ISIS is common. And it's because everyone in their community has the same injustice. Once you identify people who have an injustice, all you have to do is direct their injustice at a cause, and then you have an enemy.
Well, this is why Hamas is so successful. I mean, everybody's been oppressed, bombed by the U.S. and Israel, and now they all share that. And then there's one organization that is allowed to exist there because they killed the Palestinian Authority guys off. Hey, you want revenge? We are waiting with open arms to help you get that opportunity.
You're suffering because of Israel. And then, of course, all those ignorant masses are like, yes, we are suffering because of Israel. That's the second step in the ladder, direct against a common enemy. Well, once you have a common enemy, it's very easy to identify a common cause. Well, we are also against Israel. We are Hamas.
Right.
And now that radical, that individual who was just lost, is like, someone sees my plight. The enemy is Israel. The cause against Israel is Hamas. And now all of a sudden, before they even realize it, they're carrying a Hamas flag and wearing a t-shirt, right? And that's the problem with extremism. That's how Al-Qaeda grew so fast. That's how ISIS grew so fast, because where it's similar to your incel example is that they feel so outraged and so marginalized that psychologically they're looking for an explanation. And that psychological explanation comes through the radicalization ladder. And it only takes a few well-trained salespeople to basically create an extremist cause.
Yeah, the recruiters are looking for that kind of thing. It's fascinating. There's this documentary that I don't think anybody has seen, but there's a journalist investigating online ISIS recruiters, and she ends up falling in love with the ISIS recruiter. And the only reason that she didn't run off or end up in deeper, but maybe even run off to Syria and meet this guy, I think she was about to do that, was because he had thought he had hung up a call, and she was recording their calls for her documentary about ISIS recruiting, ironically. And he said something in Arabic, and she was like, that's weird. I wonder what that was. So she was like, I'm going to ask somebody to translate it. And the person was like, he said, hey, Abdullah, I got you another one. These girls are so dumb. You're going to owe me so much money after I'm done with all of them. I'm sending you a wife. She's going to leave soon. And she was like, oh, I'm being played. Super freaking interesting. And so it's easy for us to say, oh, only dumb people fall for this. But when somebody has enough of a baseline on you to figure out where your little holes in your soul are, and they know how to fill them because they've been trained by Iranian intelligence or to do that or whatever, it's a pretty good sell. Absolutely. It's a pretty good pitch.
You only need 15 skilled recruiters to create thousands of volunteer recruits. We're right back to the same topic we had earlier, motivation and manipulation. It's very hard to manipulate people into joining an ideological cause. It's hard to manipulate someone into wearing a bomb vest and killing themselves. It's much easier to motivate them when you connect the fact that their injustice is going to be righted forever. And they can have a legacy impact on every Palestinian or every Sunni Islam or Shia Islam person in the future, right? Like, that's how it works. It's the same. It's as frustrating as it is and as angry as people get, it is the same way we recruit for the US military. It is the same thing we do here. We fill new recruits' heads with ideology, army of one, Marine strong. We fill people with this ideology. So then this poor child, this 18-year-old.
Is it Army strong? It's the few, the proud, the Marines. I know that much.
Thank you.
Jeez, man, come on. I know you're in the Air Force. You should have this.
But all you're doing is you're reaching into rural America for the most part. You're reaching into rural America, finding these people who don't know where they're going to go and they feel lost. And mom and dad didn't save any money for college.
Manufacturing's gone.
For the most part, again, there's a bell curve, right? And then you're basically telling them they can be part of a larger cause. And then that part of the larger cause is you can come fight for your country and fight for freedom. At the end of the day, what they're saying is, if you die in service to America, that's a life well spent.
That's why they always show those funerals, man. With the salutes and the flag and then the folding of the flag and giving it to the person. It's like I know they show that all the time. In part, it's really impressive, but one of the reasons it's impressive, the whole design is, I think if you sort of, maybe I'm paranoid, but I feel like if you backwards rationalize why they make that impressive, it's because...
It's all propaganda. And there isn't a veteran out there who won't tell you they fell for it once, and then when they actually saw their buddies die, they were like, what a waste of a good life. Right? You want to know what's honorable? Having a long, fulfilling, productive life that serves a family and the American dream and all. That's what's a long, productive, successful life. The most honorable thing you can do is live a fulfilling life serving your family and the people of the country by being productive and being a contributing member of society. That's the most honorable thing. Dying in service to your nation is not the most honorable thing. It's just another honorable thing. The challenge is and that's part of why you're seeing a recruitment crisis right now. Because today's generation who has lived with information at their fingertips, they know there's alternatives. And they know that no matter how desperate they might feel, there's still alternatives. And once you sign that paperwork, you're locked in for a long time. Plus, you have a whole generation of people like me, veterans of years past, who now that we have children and we're mentoring teenagers, we're like, you don't have to join the military. When I was a teenager, everybody in my sphere of influence was like, you got to join the military.
Really? We're going to end up doing, if we haven't already, some program where it's like, you want to move to the United States? You have to join the military. You have to.
We're in a bad place, For recruiting, we are in a bad place.
I'm surprised. It will not surprise me if in 5 years it is every single immigrant who's under the age of, 33, 36, man or woman must, at age 18 or something, serve for 7 years and you get your blue passport after the fact. It's going to be something like that. I mean, we already have to do that for labor. So it's a natural extension of that. A lot of people say things like, trust your gut, trust your intuition. I don't know what you think, but I hate that because your intuition is made up of a bunch of your feelings that are based on other things that have happened to you over your life or things, how you feel. It's just not reality.
Yeah, I completely agree. Trusting your gut does not account for what we call cognitive bias. Yes, it's bad enough that you're just trusting your emotions, but there's actual science that shows that the human brain leaps to conclusions.
Yes.
And then after it's leaped to a conclusion enough times, it just wires itself that way. So, you see this every time you talk to somebody who's hyper-religious or somebody who's hyper-political. There's no space for any kind of new information because they just leap to a conclusion. That is essentially trusting your gut.
I see this with one of the worst examples I've seen recently is a doctor made a video. I don't do a lot of social media, but I saw that someone sent this to me on Instagram. A doctor made a video about, and I can't remember what it was, but it's not relevant. It was just something like, hey, here's a medical thing that you might not know about your child. And a lot of the top comments were, no way, my mama gut says this, and I will always do that. Mama knows best. And I'm like, you are arguing with a doctor, a physician, an MD, and she is saying, don't do this, this is bad. And it's like, well, my mama knows best. Why would you know best? You gave birth to this person. Good, you have a good baseline on your kid, as per our previous conversation. That does not indicate whatsoever that you are qualified to give medical advice or even make a really good medical decision.
Yeah.
It's terrifying to see stuff like that.
And it happens all the time. And what's
Yeah.
worse is because we live in an age where information is so available, it gets reinforced. Because now in your algorithm looks for how you respond to things, and then it feeds you more of what you already believe. So you end up in this echo chamber that gets smaller and smaller and more hyper niche to you. And then we all end up wondering how that other person ended up so crazy before we think, oh, wait, maybe I'm equally as crazy in my own echo chamber of what social media and entertainment is telling me.
I know fear has some wisdom in it. We've talked about the gift of fear with Gavin DeBecker. And you know who he is?
Yep.
Yeah. Most of the time, though, it's just a bad idea to go with subjective emotion, right? It seems like... Do you train that out of people at the CIA? Is that something they train out of you?
You know, it's funny. The answer is no, because the gift of fear is very real.
Oh, not the gift. Sorry.
No, I'm with you. I know what you're saying. I know what you're
gotcha.
saying. But here's what I'm saying, right? The gift of fear is very real. So you don't ever want to undermine the value of that gift.
Yes. Okay.
Because that's what keeps us alive.
Right.
Not only what keeps us alive, but oftentimes when it comes to a field operation, you're keeping yourself alive and the other people on your team. So you want everybody to have the gift of fear. But what we try to do is we try to reprogram how the brain and body connection reacts to fear. So I'm going to try and do this in like a Reader's Digest version. Fear always comes from an external stimulus. So if you picture like a diagram of like connecting lines, you've got an external stimulus that is picked up by one of your 5 senses: sight, sound, touch, taste, feel, right? So somewhere in there, one of your 5 senses picks up on this external stimulus that is then just information, not an emotion, just information is then sent to both your left and right hemisphere simultaneously. Your left hemisphere of your brain is your emotional center. Your left is your logical center. Your right is your emotional center. So
Is that real? I thought that was sort of like not a thing, the left and right.
left and right is totally real.
The left and right hemispheres are, but is it true that our emotions are really located in one hemisphere? And
That's not. I mean, scientifically, they cross-pollinate, and there's like central nodes inside the brain. So it's just
okay.
But as an example, there's essentially two pathways through the brain that are conveniently described as left and right. But the pathway of your brain that is emotional, when it sees the stimulus through the 5 senses, the emotional part of your brain immediately triggers your survival instinct, right? Fight or flight, threat or non-threat, really, right? And then it can immediately tell your amygdala, which is the physiological response of your body, how to react, because it's a one-step connection, right? It's literally stimulus goes to brain reacts emotionally, fight or flight, tells body, sweat, panic, increase your heart rate, get ready to run. That's your emotional pathway. Your logical pathway has 2 extra steps. The information comes in, the information is shared with your brain, but the first thing your brain does is it says, have I seen this before? So it goes against an index of previous experiences. And then after it processes through that index and it says, yes, I have seen this before, or no, I haven't seen it before, it then goes to another part of your rational brain that says, when I saw this before, or when I've seen something like this before, what was the outcome? Well, then it comes up with a response that is measured and rational, and then it goes to the amygdala, and then it tells the body how to react. So what I'm saying there is that the left and right brain are the emotional pathway and the logical pathway in response to the same fear stimulus. One happens faster than the other. So have you ever had a moment where you've been startled by something in the corner?
Of course, yeah.
You see something,
Socks on your floor or whatever.
and you think it's a snake or a rat. You startle, but then like a half a second later, you're like, oh, it's just socks.
Right.
And then you come down. Well, the startle is a physiological response. You actually had an increase in your heart rate and your blood pressure, right? You had a very real physical response, physiological response. And then when you came down, you had a very real physical response. That is exactly what's happening. So that is the gift of fear. The gift of fear is the startle that could have kept you alive if it was actually a rat. So what CIA trains us to do, this is a lot longer than Reader's Digest, and I can tell it from your face.
No, I'm all paranoid, like, how many of my kids' drawings are on camera?
What CIA trains you to do is slow down the emotional side of your thinking and speed up the rational side of your thinking so that you startle less and you rationalize more, but the impact to your amygdala, it levels out your physiological response. So now when you see something in the corner of your house, you still see it, but you don't panic. Instead, you see it and you're like, what's that in the corner of the house? Right? That's what it's all about. And that's exactly how you train a very successful case officer. It's how you train a very successful field operator. That's how you train a successful shooter. You train them to not have a spike in their physiological response to a true fear stimulus.
How do CIA agents develop assets in other countries? If you let's say you're stationed in Panama or whatever, like where I was, you're going to meet somebody, that they're a narco trafficker because you've got background information on people that are going to be at the party at the Australian embassy or whatever it is. And you just know he's a real estate developer, right? A lot of these guys do, but he's a narco. How do you start to develop a relationship with this person?
It's a great question. There's an actual process that we're taught, and it's a process very similar to the sales cycle, very similar to like a leadership cycle, very similar to a social cycle about how you make a friend or how you gain someone's trust or how you make someone take action and buy your product. Espionage is really nothing more than the selling of treachery. That's all espionage is, right? You're just pitching somebody on the idea of giving away secrets in exchange for something else. It's very much a sales pitch, right? So the process to develop the asset is it's an acronym that we call SADRAT, S-A-D-R-A-T. That's funny.
Great acronym. Yeah.
It's a government acronym.
Yikes.
But the SADRAT acronym stands for Spot, Assess, Develop, Recruit, Handle. Even though handle starts with an H, it's a government acronym.
I gotcha, yeah.
And T is terminate. This process, S-A-D-R-A-T, is just the process that's always happening. So you spot a target, you assess the target for whether or not they have access to information and whether or not they're susceptible to potential espionage. Because remember, if they have access but they can't be turned, you don't want to waste your time. If they don't have access and they look like they're going to be easy to turn, they're not going to be helpful. So you're looking for that right person who both has access to secrets and is willing to share those secrets. So the A is very important. And then you go into the term develop, which is the term you use. How do you develop the asset? Develop is a very specific term that we use that talks about cultivating and training and exchanging information and testing core behaviors to make sure that that person can truly engage in a secret relationship that nobody else knows about. If you apply SADRAT to like getting married, it makes a lot of sense. You spot a lot of potential partners. You assess potential partners against, could I live with them? Could they live with me? Could they raise children? Could they be financially responsible? And then you kind of whittle it down to the ones who are yes to all of those. But that's not where you stop. Then you actually date them for a while. You test them for a while. You see how do they handle when I'm sick with food poisoning? How do they handle when we travel overseas? That's all part of the D in develop, because you're developing a relationship that ends, like the development period ends, when you actually ask the question, will you marry me? When they say yes, they are now recruited. And then when they're recruited, everything changes.
Right.
That's why it's so much fun to like be dating, and it's not fun at all to be engaged.
The sad part is the happy part.
Yeah.
And the rat part, not always smooth sailing.
Right. So in the recruitment phase, now it's like they said yes, you said yes, you're in a relationship that is intentionally there to exchange secrets. Well, now there has to be like rules, and there have to be actions that are consistent, and there's responsibility and obligation and all this other stuff. And then through the entirety of that relationship, you are in the handling phase. Handling is really more like what we joke about with marriage, where most husbands joke that happy wife, happy life.
Yeah.
It's kind of real, but it's also, we joke about it because what we're really saying is we have to meet our wife's expectations to keep her happy.
Yeah, I'm pretty sure I'm the one being handled, which is why this doesn't always hold up. The analogy doesn't always hold up. Yeah.
Correct. Well, that's how most husbands are. And we think that we're the developing officer until we actually get married, and then we all realize we're being handled.
Yeah, being played by a double agent.
That's how it works. And then, but the place where I hope you and I never get to is the T, the terminate. Because in a true clandestine relationship, when the asset is no longer useful, you don't want to continue having meetings with that asset. So you terminate the relationship, not terminate the person,
Right.
just terminate the relationship. And that means you find a reason to stop talking. In marriage terms, that would be like your typical divorce or your separation. It's like, hey, you no longer serve me, so I'm going to let you go so I can go right back to the spot part of SADRAT.
I heard that when the Soviet Union fell, a lot of people who thought they were in relationships with Russian women were just like completely ghosted. I'm sure this number is relatively small, right? But people who were being developed by KGB agents suddenly found themselves on the other end of not answering my letters or my calls or whatever it was back in the 80s. Like, what happened? And the answer is their paychecks stopped coming, and they were like, screw this. I'm going back to Uzbekistan or whatever, and I'm done with this bullshit. And so the diplomat or whatever that had been cheating on his wife is no longer in a relationship with anybody. And it just brings up sort of an interesting... Well, actually, let me ask you this. Sexpionage, I know you get asked about this a lot. Yeah, there's a podcast about this. It's called To Die For. My friend Neil, you know Neil Strauss?
Yeah.
Yeah, so Neil did this podcast, and I love Neil, but I think this woman's story is BS. Not that because sexpionage isn't a thing, nothing adds up, but sexpionage happens, I'm sure of it. I think I've known some people who I'm like, I'm pretty sure you're being played by this person, but I'm curious if certainly they train you guys on how to avoid this. Tell me about it a little bit. I think a lot of people are curious about this.
Yeah, absolutely. So sexpionage is a commercial term. We call them sexual exploitation operations, because essentially what you're doing is you're exploiting or motivating / manipulating somebody on the basis of their sex, not their gender, but their sexual preferences. So that can be homosexual, that can be heterosexual, that can be bisexual, that can be any number of the kinks that are out there. If you exploit their sexuality, it is a sexual exploitation operation. And there's left and right boundaries, so to speak. In the United States, we have no problem with sexual exploitation operations, but we will not sexually exploit using one of our intelligence officers. Because what ends up happening pragmatically is once you cross the boundary into sex with the Western mentality, you also cross a boundary emotionally. In the West, that's something that's very unique to the West. In Latin America and in Asia and in like India, people have sex all the time and it's not emotional. But here in the United States, we are of a culture where once you cross the sex boundary, you can't help but, by the conditioning of our culture, also cross an emotional boundary.
Interesting.
So we do not create operations where our officers engage in sex to withdraw secrets from a target. That does not mean that our officers don't facilitate sex for a target. So if you have somebody who's really into, transgender men or transgender females, you might facilitate them getting a transgender prostitute or a transgender boyfriend or girlfriend, and you become the friend that helps them get the sex they want.
Yeah, that's an interesting little hustle right there, huh?
The left and right boundaries,
Yeah.
right? Whereas you consider SVR or MSS, the Russians or the Chinese, they very much let their own officers, they push their own officers to engage in sexual exploitation operations because they don't have freedom of choice in those countries. They don't have personal rights in those countries. And oftentimes what they find is that in those countries, sex is already like not an emotional thing.
Yeah.
So they can leverage that tool much faster. And it's better to put a trained operator in bed with a target than it is to put a trained operator in the room next to the target. And then after the target gets their rocks off, then you have a conversation. But in our country, that's essentially what we're left with.
Yeah, interesting. And by the way, one of the other reasons I brought up Neil Strauss, not to throw shade on his podcast, which I actually quite enjoyed, even though, again, I think our story is full of holes. He was supposed to write a profile of Lukashenko, the president of Belarus, the dictator of Belarus. And he started getting these emails that were like, hey, by the way, in preparation for your visit, we just want to know what kind of girls you like. And it was very clunky. And I thought, this is KGB training? You literally ask the dude what kind of girls he likes?
Or you could just read the game. He basically outlines his dream girl.
Or like, look at the woman he's dating now. I mean, there's a type here, man. It was really kind of ridiculous. But he started to be like, what are you talking about? And the emails are comically clunky, man. It's like, we just want you to have a good time. Maybe you'll meet somebody and maybe there's a future in it. And it's just like, you have read this entirely wrong. Like the budget cuts over there at the Belarusian KGB must be pretty intense. But it was very clunky. But it was so funny to see this happen, because he was supposed to go there and write a profile of the president. Obviously, what they're looking for is to get him in a compromising situation, videotape it or whatever, and then make sure that the profile is flattering, or they were going to do something. Otherwise, what's the point? If you want to show somebody a good time and it's spontaneous, just wait till they're there and have a party. I mean, that's all you need to do. But they were like, no, we really want to make damn sure that this person gets it in. It was just so ridiculous. And I'm imagining that most operations involving sexpionage, sexual exploitation, are a little bit smoother.
It's not necessarily that they're smooth. It's that they are very intentional. And oftentimes what happens is when you're dealing with somebody who can be sexually exploited, they don't want to be coy about it. They prefer a bold approach.
Really?
Yeah. So more often than not, when like a true sexual exploitation operation happens, it's kind of like the smoking hot female, or the smoking hot gay guy, or the smoking hot whatever, walks right up to the person and is super bold and is just like, hey, I saw that you're sitting here alone, and what are you doing in town? And do you want to go up to my room and have a good time? It's just bold. And what ends up happening is for anybody who's listening and watching, and here's a moment, here's what I call real talk, right? Let's have a real talk moment here. If sex motivates you, the only thing more motivating than sex is fast sex. So
I suppose you're right.
So like there are plenty of people out there that, and the reason Belarus does it is because they learned it from KGB and MSS learned it from KGB. Why beat around the bush? It's better to just say, hey, hey, what kind of women do you like? What kind of wine do you like? What kind of this do you like? What kind of that do you like? You bury it among 4 or 5 options. But what they're really saying to the right person who can be exploited, what they're really saying is, if you'll tell us what kind of women you like, we'll make sure you get them. But to some people, they judge it wrong. But to most people that are actually exploitable sexually, they will answer that question. And they'll be like, I like red wine, I like Cabernet, I like red beef, or I like rare beef. I like blondes that weigh 130 pounds or less. I like whatever. And they'll put their list in there.
I lost you there for a second, Andrew. Let's see, what's on the menu? Yeah, it was, you're right. It seems like it must be a filter. Like, hey, look, basically proposition this dude as much as you can in writing. And if he runs, not the right target.
Not the right target. Because you know what? There are plenty of other journalists that we can have come out and do the profile. And if we can't get this one, there's 9 others that we can choose from.
Interesting. He didn't end up doing the profile, obviously. He was afraid to go after that for obvious reasons.
It's Belarus.
It's Belarus.
I mean,
even people who are from Belarus don't want to go to Belarus.
For real. Like, everyone should be afraid of going to Belarus under any conditions.
Yeah. It's my brother is getting married, and he's dating a girl from Belarus. And this will come out after that, so I'm not afraid to talk about this. But one of the reasons he's getting married in Georgia, and I don't mean the state, I mean the country of. And the reason is because her passport was expiring. She lives in a third country. I'm not going to say where they live. They live in a third country in Eastern Europe. She wanted to go renew her passport because they wanted to come here and visit for Christmas. Well, as it turns out, you need to go to the embassy and renew your passport. Okay, so she goes to the embassy, the Belarusian embassy, and they said, you can't renew your passport. You have to go back to Belarus. She goes, okay. Calls her family in Belarus, and they were like, do not come back. So-and-so's uncle came home, and now he can't go work in Germany where he has his job because they won't let him leave. And they confiscated his passport. So they're like, don't come back. Crap, my passport's not going to get renewed. So my brother's like, screw it, I guess I'm proposing, romantic, right, to get documents. So he goes, all right, let's get married. He's a citizen of another country, and they have a couple citizenships between them. He's got a couple citizenships or whatever, residences anyways. So she has to get a document. In the country where they live, she needs a document that says she's not already married in Belarus. So she goes back to the embassy, and the guy goes, I'm not giving you that. You should marry a Belarusian. And besides, if you want to get married to that guy, go get married in Belarus. It's cheaper anyway. So they are just like, no. Go back to Belarus. And so she knows she's going to get, there's just a non-zero chance she can never leave.
Yeah.
So he calls me in a panic, and he's like, where can we get married where you don't need documents? And I'm like, the United States, kinda? And it's like Iceland and Georgia. So he's like, great, I've already been to Georgia. We really like it there. So they're getting married in Georgia quite quickly. And she's going to then have a marriage that's valid to this guy who's got a passport from another country, which gets her da-da-da-da-da. She doesn't need a Belarusian passport anymore. She's basically abandoning that whole idea. And it's quite a saga. I forget what the hell my original point was, but here we are.
That's okay. Well, I mean, it's going to be tough. But your point, your original point was about sexual exploitation operations.
Yeah.
And why nobody should go to Belarus.
Right. I think it was just why nobody should go to Belarus. I think that was just an anecdote about that particular thing, which is a shame because I would love to visit a place like that. The problem is I want to eventually leave. Yeah. And I think that's the trick.
There's really nothing to see that I would want to see in Belarus.
Have you been there before?
So Belarus is on a short list of places where, like, I'm never really allowed to go, and Russia's on that list too.
Sure.
But if anything you want to see in Belarus, you'd prefer to see it in Russia, anyways, right? So
maybe,
because that's really the whole reason Belarus is a dangerous place is because it's essentially a shadow government run by Russia.
Yeah. What is the term people use? Like, not puppet state, which is also true, but and not even fiefdom, but. There's a term that they use. It's an antiquated term. Whatever. I'll look it up later. It's like a principality almost of Russia.
Yeah.
Where else can you not go?
Cuba is on my list of places where I can't go. China is on my list of places where I can't go. Hong Kong is now on that list. Taiwan will probably be on that list very soon.
You think so?
Yeah. I mean, it's not just me. It's really anybody with my credentials or background. Like, I can't go to Ukraine right now.
Yeah.
So there's places where we become a risk if someone with our credentials ends up being picked up in a place like that. And these are not free countries. There's not.
Taiwan is free, but there's a lot of MSS operating in Taiwan, obviously.
And like, again, when we talk about free, like, the Taiwanese police could wrap me up, and then come up with any trumped up claim, and it would work.
But Taiwan is a friendly state in so many ways. Why would they wrap you up?
The Taiwanese president is friendly. The Taiwanese legislature is not. The Taiwanese police divisions are different by principality, and that's what people don't realize about most of the world. People don't realize that the way that laws work in the United States, where the federal law is similar, if not the same as most state laws, like in the United States, we have very little difference between state and municipality and federal
law
and you have
structure. Superseding federal law and things like that.
And the rest of the world is not like that. Like, you could literally enter one part of Cambodia, cross through a police district where the laws are completely different, and end up violating a law where they hold you in that precinct, even though you entered into a different precinct and you were just traveling through on a bus. Who knows what, right? It's not the same as the United States.
Yeah, Taiwan, I'm still a little confused by that, just because it does seem so friendly. I mean, Hong Kong obviously is part of China.
Hong Kong was super friendly.
Yeah.
Until it suddenly wasn't friendly.
Right.
If you were there 4 days before it was suddenly unfriendly, it would have still been unfriendly, right? Like, since the Taiwanese elections in January, the pro-unity with China government, that they control the legislature. The president is pro-separation, but that president is having a hell of a hard time getting anything done in Taiwan right now because the legislation, the parliament, the legislature wants to go closer back to ties with China.
Yeah.
So even sitting here having a conversation where we're like, Taiwan is free. Taiwan is not free. Taiwan is split. Taiwan is torn, right? The parliament, the legislature, has representatives of all the districts of Taiwan.
Sure.
The majority of those districts are represented by somebody who wants to reunify with China, which means that China spreads its hands everywhere anyways.
Sure. Yeah.
It's definitely deep into those districts that want unity with China. So now more than half of Taiwanese districts, we can assume, are influenced by, if not penetrated by, China.
Yeah.
And their police precincts in those districts will be heavily influenced by, if not penetrated by, China. So when we say Taiwan is free...
I just mean from a personal liberties democratic standpoint, it seems quite democratic right now, but maybe not. I don't know.
I mean, I'm not going to risk it, personally.
Yeah. I mean, I don't blame you for that. I'm just saying it seems like this is something where I have to ask like an actual sort of Taiwan-China experts, because I know dissidents that freely travel to Taiwan, but can obviously not go to China. and they would never go to Hong Kong because they'd be arrested immediately.
Are they traveling after January of this year?
Yeah, that's a good question. I don't know. I have to ask.
The danger of traveling in and out is increasing every day.
Yeah, that's
and
interesting.
it's the same thing with Hong Kong.
I'll have to ask. Hong Kong, I can't go to China or Hong Kong, but I last went to Taiwan in October, and now I'm like, well, crap, should I not go back? I talk a lot about China on the show. I am not in their good graces by any stretch. But I'm no spy as far as they know. You mentioned secret life before, sharing your secret life. Can you separate that from? Well, first of all, I'd like to define that a little more, and then talk about how you pry your way into something like that.
So we talked about this earlier when we were discussing the idea of judging people by the label,
right.
like the label on the can, if you will, or the label on the jar. There's 3 types of lives that we all carry. At least we're taught that everybody carries 3 types of lives, right? There's a public life, a private life, and a secret life. The public life is the life you want other people to see. So going back to our example about the ISIS extremist who's parroting ideology, or the brand new, U.S. military recruit who's parroting ideology, that is their public life. That's what they put on so everyone around them can see it, right? I'm smiling, not that I'm actually happy. I'm laughing at your joke, even though it's not really funny.
Oh,
I'm pretending that my relationship with my wife is perfect, even though I know that it's flawed.
Yeah.
That's all public life stuff,
Sure.
and we all have a very public life. We carry it with us to work, we carry it with us on dates, we carry it with us at the gym. We want people to believe that we're confident and capable, right? That's all public life stuff. Not real, public. Then behind that we have what's called a private life. Your private life is what's known to the people who are in your inner circle, the people who are your closest friends, and in that private life, they know things about you that nobody on the public knows.
Right.
They know that I'm lactose intolerant. They know that your feet maybe stink when you take them out of your shoes. They know that you don't like to stay up past 10
Public
p.m.
and private life are crashing into each other right now on this podcast.
But that's all part of your private life, right? Your wife knows it.
Yeah.
Your mom knows it. Your close friend from college. These people know whatever it is. And it's more compromising than what the public knows, but it's not compromising enough that it makes you feel nervous.
Right. Now, my wife tells me I'm exactly like I am on the podcast, which is, who knows what that really, I guess that means that those things merge together a little bit. But clearly there are things that I don't broadcast on this show.
Well, I mean, just a few minutes ago, you were talking about how you were immediately distracted by the idea of how much else about your children is posted on the walls.
Oh, just the drawings, yeah. Because I realized how much, I don't really mind if people know that, they
but
know
that's
my
a
kids,
private life concern.
Yeah, it's a private life concern. Yeah.
Right? That's a private life concern. The third life that we have is called a secret life. Your secret life is the life that you keep secret from even your closest people in the private circle. There are secrets you have that your wife doesn't know. There are secrets that your wife has that you don't know.
Ugh, uncomfortable.
Super uncomfortable, but this is what's so powerful about espionage. When you learn that that's the truth, and then you validate, you're like, holy shit, there are definitely secrets that I have that I don't tell anybody. Once you learn you have a secret life, it's not that much of a stretch to understand everybody has a secret life. The power happens when you can get other people to share their secret life with you. Secret life is all the things that you're the most ashamed of, you're the most guilty about, the things that you fear judgment and shame, like it's the things that you don't even like to talk to yourself about, but you know they're true. All of that constitutes your secret life. What's so powerful about secret life is once somebody shares their secret life with you, they are forever wedded to the fact that you have been let into their secret life.
Right.
It's like the ultimate form of loyalty.
Yeah.
Because nobody knows this thing about them except them and you.
Well, it's like guys you've ever traveled with when you go to Thailand. You just come back and it's like, remember when Tom and I went to Thailand with you? And it's like, shh, she's in the other room. Like there's a few of those.
There's a bond there, right? And that bond is super powerful when it comes to the idea of using that bond for leverage and gaining secrets again, because espionage is all about stealing secrets.
Yeah.
Well, once you've been let into someone's secrets, it's very easy to get them to tell you more secrets that don't even compare to that secret from their secret life.
Right. So if you want to get, obviously, right, I used to teach like share and then be shared with. It seems like if you're CIA, you would share something that was fake and constructed because you don't really want them to have leverage over you.
So what you're talking about is elicitation. And this is what I always loved what you taught in your previous podcast, right? But it's still surface level.
Yeah.
It's still like introductory level. It's like Neil Strauss.
Yeah.
The stuff that he teaches is all very superficial, surface level psychology. when it comes to actually applying that psychology against a wide variety of targets, it gets more nuanced.
Yeah,
So share
makes
to be
sense.
shared with is an elicitation technique that's technically called give to get. I went to this university. Well, it's logical for you to tell me where you went to university.
Sure.
When it comes to getting into someone's secret life, you can't give to get because then you're giving your secrets.
But that's my point.
And if you give a lie, you're not showing that you're worthy of their secret life. Because if they suspect or think that there's a lie there, they're not going to let you in. What you have to do is you have to make assessed guesses, hypotheses that come with validation about what you already suspect is in their secret life. So you look at them and you're kind of like, I understand a lot of people have a hard time around 7 years of marriage, and they start wondering whether or not their wife is a good fit. And I see the way that you and your wife argue sometimes, and I can't help but wonder if maybe you're feeling that way too. And I don't want you to feel bad if that's the way you feel, because I've had lots of friends feel the same way.
This sounds exactly like what we used to teach, not on the podcast, but in the programs that we were selling, because I did teach it to MI6 and possibly a quite big question mark to CIA, because they don't tell you what you're doing. There's a lot of like, film this training for our corporation in a room with one person who's just taking notes and quiet.
Yeah.
Which was kind of how I think the MI6 thing was. It was just, there wasn't like a room full of guys looking at me. It was like a video camera thing. And I found out more or less by accident. And definitely when you're teaching, I wonder, in fact, confirm this for me if you can. Do you ever receive training where it's just like a person on video teaching something?
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, because there were times where I'm like, so I'm going to, I don't know, Northern Virginia to teach this thing in just like an empty room, and there's essentially a secretary or like one other person asking me if I need water or something to drink, turning off a video camera on and off, comes back into the room after lunch with a bunch of random questions that I'm guessing she didn't come up with herself, clarifications, do it again at the end of the thing. And I'm like, who's watching me give this training that doesn't want to just sit in this room?
Yeah. And that's exactly how that's how a lot of our training works.
Really? Okay.
And it's because it's top tier training.
Yeah.
But it's still one-sided. You have a need to know the content of the training, but the trainer does not have a need to know the people who are in the training.
Well, right. That I just suspect. I'm like, these have got to be DIA or DO officers that can't have me see their face.
And there's also an element of, it may just be a panel of HR people who are determining whether or not your training is even applicable, because there's no benefit to letting you know that there's even real people there. So if they had 5 different people coming in to talk about 5 different ways to apply psychology to relationship building, they have one person at 9 a.m., another person at 12:30, another person at 2, another person at 5, whatever, right? It's all recorded.
Yeah.
And it's all assessed by an HR panel, and then that HR panel could split and splice all the best pieces of all 5 together into one packaged video that then gets sent to the DO.
Yeah, this is multiple days. So either it was a really in-depth assessment or it was a training. Because I was so confused as to why I'm training this completely disinterested person in a video camera.
Yeah.
And I'm like, this can't be used for commercial use. You signed off on the thing, so what are you using this tape for? It was and then my friends from agencies were like, maybe it was this thing, but nobody's going to tell me. So it's funny, you and I got in touch years and years ago, and again, we forgot how that even happened, or at least that's the story we're going with. And I was like, oh, call me when you have a book. It's easier for me to prep. What is going on? Because the clearance process for these books, I made a joke about the clearance process, but it was apparently that's really the holdup. Yeah,
the clearance process. So as a former CIA officer, I have a lifetime secrecy agreement, an NDA, where I can't disclose operational details about my past. I can talk about lots of other things, but sources and methods about intelligence operations that I participated in is one of those no-go lists. To get that approved, I have to run it through CIA. So we wrote a manuscript. That manuscript has been with CIA. It has actually technically been approved by CIA. However, there were changes in the geopolitical landscape related to what we wrote about in our book that then CIA exercised their right to deny the book. So then we had to change some of the details to accommodate CIA's requirements, and then it's gone back in for another round of revisions. So we are hoping to have a book approved by CIA so that we can get it published and on bookshelves by summer of 2025.
Wow.
But it was originally supposed to be released by summer of 2024 until CIA changed their mind. And it's really tied to the fact that my wife and I, our operations were so modern that the contents of the book is unlike anything anybody's ever seen before, and it makes CIA nervous.
It's a great pitch. Yeah, just spitting facts, guys. My book is full of amazing things no one's ever seen before. But are you going to be able to tell where you were deployed in the book?
Not in terms of specific
What about
countries.
region?
Regionally,
Yeah,
yes. Yep.
because I mean I have my suspicions, but I can't talk about that yet. So I'm sure they're in a huge rush to get this cleared.
Exactly.
They have nothing else going
That's
on.
why every 30 days we remind them that they had a 30-day timeline
right.
to
And they're
approve
like,
the book.
We'll make the rules around here. Thank you very much. Yeah. You've got this cool, I guess, technique, for lack of a better word, which is 2 questions and 1 confirmation. And when you talked about this, it was so funny because I go, oh, I'm pretty sure that this is 1, how I have most conversations in my life with new people, and 2, how I conduct this exact podcast. Because if I just ask questions, I've seen hosts do that. It's weird.
Yeah.
It's a weird vibe. It doesn't work well. And people go, Jordan, I like your show because it's a conversation. And I'm like, yeah, but I'm definitely controlling the questions. It's a question, and then I tell an anecdote or something like that. And I think it works really well. I mean, scoreboard, I suppose. But tell me about this, because I never really thought about it as a tactic that would make sense outside of this particular job.
Oh yeah, so
it does.
It absolutely makes sense, because what the tactic of 2 questions and a confirmation or a validation, what the tactic does is it builds an artificial relationship. It manufactures trust between 2 people, because it shows that one person's in control, but it also shows that the one person who's in control is actually interested enough that they're contributing, they're participating in the conversation,
right.
Which makes the person answering questions feel like they're special, makes them feel like they're being listened to, it makes them feel heard, it makes them feel validated, right? And that is a natural human response to being in a community where you are valued and where you are an equal player. So this idea of ask a question, ask a relevant follow-up question, and then volunteer a congruent fact to validate the person is just a constant snowball that builds more and more momentum that makes the target feel comfortable.
I will sometimes retain journalists and be like, how can I improve my interview technique? And I did that in years past, especially. And what's funny is they go, well, it did work when I listened to it. However, at ABC, we were trained to only ask questions. So when you do an interview with them, if they ever interview, we do like mock interviews, I'm just like, this is weird. You're just asking me questions. Yeah. You're not adding to this at all. And occasionally on YouTube, someone will be like, I'm a journalist and I want to help you get better at this interview thing. And they're like, never talk about yourself. Never add anything. They're like, just stick to the questions. And it's always kind of funny to me because I'm thinking, this is like how to make your show exactly like anybody else and make yourself totally replaceable and uninteresting 101.
Yeah.
Like,
it's
never add anything.
Well, what's funny is like journalists don't realize that the medium of a podcast is not anything like journalism, right? That's you
can say that again.
Yeah, right? It's completely different. It's a whole different media platform, which is why podcasting is so popular and journalism is going the way of the dodo. Not to mention the fact that when a journalist interviews somebody, it's because they want the attention to be on the subject and they're trying to inform the public about the subject. With podcasting, what you're trying to do is you're trying to create a relationship between the guest and the audience.
Yes.
And the host is just the conduit to represent the audience to the guest, so that the guest always feels like they have a conversation with, or the audience always feels like they're having a conversation with the guest. That's the difference between the 2 platforms. And for me, it speaks to why podcasting is not going anywhere anytime soon.
Yeah, I there's some nuance in here that isn't worth discussing, I think, but you're largely correct. By the way, I want to stick up for good journalism. I think it's one of the most important things in the world. There's a reason it's called the fifth estate or whatever. I think it's super important. But you're right, the journalistic sort of interview, there's a reason those things are 5, 10, 2 minutes, because that's as long as people want to hear somebody be grilled about, I don't know, their new music album or whatever.
Right.
you have to have a conversation if you want to keep people interested. It's
Yeah.
just that's just how it goes.
And I will always stand up for good journalism. Unfortunately, good journalism is getting harder and harder to find.
It is. It is. I wanted to go back to one of your earlier points about creating relationships. I love the idea that this is, you said, effective at sales. My previous company, I sold probably tens of millions of dollars worth of services, essentially. But I had so much trouble hiring someone else to do the same thing. And part of it was because I was not good at all at training them on how to do this thing that we just discussed. I never really thought about it, even until recently, as question, follow-up question, maybe third follow-up question, and then a share or a confirmation, as you called it. So this is a high-ticket item I was selling. I mean, it was a large seminar. $6,000 to $8,000, and this is a decade and change ago, so that was real money. It is still real money. But I spent months just talking to people, and it would be like, oh, I got a check-in call with this person. Hey, man, how did that thing go that you were doing? Did you end up switching companies? Oh, man. Oh, did you break up with her? Oh, finally. She was driving you nuts. Okay, well, I got to run, man. Are you still thinking about summer of next year when you get your new job and you get your bonus? Cool. All right, well, I'll talk to you in a few months. No ask. Just like moving things along kind of one increment at a time. And then one day I would call and go, ready, man? Time to pull the trigger. And they go, here's $10,000. And then I remember people seeing those closing calls and going, how did you do that? Well, 18 months ago, I started this this freight train moving. Because it looks like magic if you just look at the last phone call. It's like you just called that person and they gave you $8,000, $10,000. How did that happen? But it was like making friends, having them tell me big problems they're having in life, and then being like, here's a solution that I will sell you for a reasonable cost relative to the scale of your problem.
Right. And
The end.
Correct. I mean, what sales should be that so few salespeople understand is sales is just a relationship. It's a relationship where you're trying to find the right balance of what we call rapport and leverage. Rapport is the back and forth exchange of things that are not sales related that build momentum for what feels like trust, right? And then once you have the rapport in place, you have built leverage. The leverage is what you need in order to get the person to take the action that you want. When you think about manipulation versus motivation, manipulative leverage is something everybody wants to avoid because it feels gross and it feels sticky.
Yeah.
Motivational leverage, people lean into. Like, we all love it when our close friend is like, dude, you need to get into the gym. We should start tomorrow. In fact, I bought you the first month at my gym.
Yeah.
Let's go work out in the morning together. We're like, hell yeah, let's go. That's motivational leverage.
Works better than, hey, you're so fat, no one's ever going to love you, right? That's not, one of those is going to be more effective.
Yeah, or I bought you your first month and you owe me, right? Like, it's not the same thing.
Yeah.
So with what ends up happening is salespeople think that it's like this process of calls and getting enough
Pressure.
information and like understanding the product details, like the features and benefits. They don't realize features and benefits don't equal purpose, right? The features and the benefits are there to complement the purpose of the sale altogether, right? I need a car. I don't really care if the car has all-weather tires and leather interior, right? I don't care that it comes with a warranty. What I care about is the purpose of the car, which is transportation that keeps my family safe and is healthy for the environment and can go a long distance on a small thing of gas, right? Whatever it might be.
This realization was so huge. This type of thing was so huge for me early in my sales career, because it was just like, I remember closing people and getting, processing their payment, and they would go, wait, what did I just buy? I don't even know. And I'm like, oh yeah, you're gonna get this and this and this and this. And they're like, yeah, but what else? And I'm like, and you list the thing and you go, wait a minute. You just gave me all this money and you didn't even really know what it was. And I remember being kind of confused. And then I asked some of my sales mentors and they're like, no, that means that this person trusted you so much that it didn't even really matter.
Yeah.
They just knew that you weren't going to screw them over, that you had a solution to their problem. The details were just not even at the front of their mind. They had to call you back or email you to get the brochure that they never looked at. And you just start to realize, like, wow, this is kind of a superpower if you get good at it.
We call it, in the espionage world, we call it selling yourself. Like, they sell themselves. And when you have a really good, well-developed, appropriate intelligence source, and you go to actually pitch them on this idea of espionage, they sell themselves. And you're like, hey, I think we have an opportunity here for your secrets to make a difference in your financial life and in the future of your country. And they're like, yeah, I thought I might have that opportunity. And I think as long as I work with you, I trust you, and I think I'm ready to do this thing. And then you're like, I didn't even make a pitch. I just said, I think you have an opportunity. And they're like, yeah, I'm ready to do this thing.
Does the CIA ever use like celebrities to get something out of folks? Because it seems like someone with massive status would, in some cases, do really well.
The problem is people with massive status are unpredictable.
Oh, that's, yeah.
How do you get them to keep
true.
a secret? How do you know who's watching them and who's not watching them? How long before they brag about whatever else? Like, the problem with celebrities is celebrities, to gain celebrity, and you know this too because you yourself are a celebrity. There's a certain element where you have,
what you did there.
but you have to value yourself. Whereas the best intelligence officers, they are sacrificial. They're like, the best thing I can do is die for my country. You don't think that at all. You don't think the best thing you can do is die for the United States. You're
Me
like,
right now?
Yeah,
No.
exactly. So that's why, like, when you want to train somebody to be a secret operative, a clandestine operative, you want them brainwashed, to use your term, in a way where they believe the best thing they can do is sacrifice.
Yeah, no, if they'd actually caught me at age 25, totally different
They would
story.
have had you, yep.
Yeah, no, honestly, before getting married plus kids, there was a chance. Not that they were trying by any means.
But once you're married with kids,
yeah.
once you see what it's like to have people who unconditionally love you, there's no way to, like, the service to your country never compares to service to the people you love.
Yeah, I think it's quite fascinating. I've heard you say anxiety is a superpower. Obviously, it keeps you alive. Are there a lot of Jews in the CIA?
So, I mean, yes, there are a lot of Jewish people in CIA.
Yes.
Yes, there are a lot of Mormons at CIA.
Okay.
And there was something else that we mentioned earlier, but I forget what it was. Oh, there's also a lot of law school grads at CIA.
Yeah,
So clearly a very anxious group.
Yes.
But my point is, CIA recruits knowing that they're looking for people that have the right balance of anxiety and risk tolerance for most of their positions. Because remember, most positions at CIA require heavy analytical thought, heavy learning, heavy repetition or training, attention to detail. All of those skills are built into somebody who has anxiety, right? Anxious people with their natural paranoia, their natural introversion, their natural distrust, their natural research curiosity are a fantastic fit for that kind of work. It's really only the field officers who have to go around the world and travel and try to meet people. Those are the only people where anxiety could potentially be a detriment. And even then, you want them to have some anxiety because you want them to always remember, they always need to have the gift of fear, recognizing that they're on the edge of getting caught at all times.
Yeah, that's weirdly, my anxiety works its way out socially. Like, if I'm home, that could be bad. But if I go to a party, I'm like, God, I feel so much better.
Yeah.
And it's almost like I'm working my anxiety out by having a conversation with somebody. It's very odd. It's probably a flow state type of thing where I don't even have time to deal with it because I'm like really enjoying this, for example. But if I had background stress, like a lot of it, after this episode was over or after we stopped hanging out, I might be like, oh crap, here's the anxiety monster once again. You know, it depends. But it's something I've learned to tame on awkwardly, maybe or unusually through the work that people are experiencing right now.
I find you to be a fantastic example of this, right? Because look at what you've accomplished. Even before you were accomplished in business, you were being assessed for work in a secret intelligence agency. Then you built a massive business. And then even after the previous podcast changed, you rebuilt another podcast, right? Like
Keep fluffing me up. I'm here for it.
But think about it for a second. Think about it for a second. How does somebody achieve all of that? And then you also know that person has anxiety.
Oh no, it's the anxiety is the superpower, man. I'm telling you, I agree with you.
I think it's so fascinating, and I think it's such a detriment that socially we make anxiety out to be like a bad thing. Like, we publish news articles or medical articles that say that 25% or 30% of Americans have anxiety, like it's a bad thing.
Yeah, I guess it depends on the level of anxiety. But I will tell you, now that I'm 44, family man, more chilled out, the growth of the business has slowed, and I like it that way. The people that I know that really are like at the top, busting their ass they're miserable, but they could be a billionaire one day. Good for them. I wouldn't trade lives with them, I'll tell you that. Certainly not.
But I just want to make, like, to me, I loved working at CIA with such amazing people, and so many of those people had anxiety.
I bet.
And watching how capable and talented they were at what they did, and then coming into the outside world where somehow people with anxiety felt ashamed and they felt like they were lesser or inferior, it's just heartbreaking because how much productivity and talent is being underutilized because we're letting people believe that anxiety is a weakness, when in fact, the people without anxiety are the ones who have less capability to really make a massive splash.
Is there anything you learned at the CIA that the American public doesn't know that you think was like disturbing or shook your worldview? Obviously, you can't share what it is, but I'm curious because, I feel like I ask a lot of these folks and they're like, you'd be surprised how boring it is back there. But you kind of, unique access.
Yeah, it is really boring out there. But I will also say that there are absolutely things that I learned that shook me and that I am certain would shake the American public. In fact, before CIA, I used to be one of those people that was like, oh, the American public can handle anything. Like, trust them and just tell them the truth. And then I got to CIA and I was like, do not tell the American public the truth.
Yeah.
Like, if my mom or my sister or my brother-in-law learned about this, they would lose their shit. And then they'd all have an opinion about what we should do about it. And then they would all start to join communities of people who thought of what we should, and then all of a sudden shit would just fall apart.
Right.
It's so much better to keep people who do not need to know, keep them blind and focused on the things that they can control. And that's really the important part here, is there's so much that you and I and the American public cannot control. And we have to learn to be okay with that because we have a democracy that allows us to vote in the people that we trust to do the things that we can't control. The day that you think that you should be given access to all the secrets, that's basically the day that you stop believing in democracy. And you start thinking, I can do my job better than the people who are elected above me. If that's what you believe, then we're a lot further away from our goals of successful democracy than we thought.
Yeah, I could not agree more. I wonder, are the things that you learned things that we will learn about in our lifetime, or is it just stuff that's probably going to get swept under the rug forever?
I mean, it's probably stuff that's going to be swept away forever because it's just one of those things that not in our lifetimes, unless something unexpected happens, but it probably won't, right? And it's secrets some of those are secrets that were there before I was even born. Where I was like, really? That's how that worked? And it still works that way? And it's probably never going to stop working that way.
Interesting. What about JFK, for example? This is something where I feel like Occam's razor comes into play, and the simplest answer is that we just had a kooky communist dude who shot him.
I would have said that, except that in 2000, what was it, 18? 2000? No, it was 2000. I think it was 2018 during the Trump presidency. The time came to re-up.
Just release all those. That's what I was going to ask you about. I think it might have even been. Was it Trump or was it Biden that was just like, actually, we're not going to release that CIA file?
And that's whoever it was. When that moment happened, what that communicated to me, and probably to you, but maybe not to all the other Americans out there, was that there is something still relevant. Still, there's a secret in that file, at least one, that's still so damaging to national security that it can't be released publicly. That doesn't necessarily mean Americans shouldn't know it, but it means it can't be released publicly because publicly released information is also available to our adversaries. So the fact that something 50 plus years old could still be so relevant that it requires reclassification, that's a big deal. And that's not the only instance of that. There's a lot of 25x2, 25 years times 2. There's a lot of clandestine or confidential information, classified information that's classified for 50 years, 25x2, that gets re-upped again.
Yeah.
Because it needs to be.
What do you think of guys like Assange and Snowden leaking secrets? As a man of secrets yourself.
Assange and Snowden are not even in the same park. They're not even in the same lane. They're not similar people at all. Snowden is a traitor against his country. He swore an oath, signed a paper that said he would not disclose secrets that put national security at risk that could harm American lives. And then he did exactly that. And he released information that could harm American lives. The fact that a different court than the court that originally deemed the collection of metadata legal, the fact that a different court overruled that previous court ruling shouldn't surprise anybody. That is the entire judicial process. That's why there are appeals. That's why people are convicted in 1 year and 2 years later they're released. That's why we're looking at a president who's been convicted of being a felon, but then at his next appeal could be granted, release or whatever else, right? That's the way our court system works. So we shouldn't be surprised that he whistle blew on a program that a different court had a different opinion about. That is not the argument. The argument is, did he damage American security? Did he hurt American lives by whistleblowing to The Guardian, which is a foreign news source, which he then used as leverage to travel from anti-American country to anti-American country until he ended up in Russia. Snowden. He did everything wrong. He is a traitor. He does not ever deserve to come back. Julian Assange is a completely different ball of wax. He's not an American citizen. Did he disclose secrets? Yes. Did he steal those secrets himself? No. Could he have been used as a covert influence parrot because he released certain information and not other information? Yes, but he's not under American jurisdiction. So he didn't sign an agreement. He didn't swear an oath to protect the American people. Completely different person, which I think is why what we are seeing play out, like Julian Assange is making progress in kind of being granted citizenship or recognition for what he did without being a criminal. But Snowden is a Russian citizen now, like as un-American as it gets.
That's going to be a great clip, and I don't normally say or think like that, but that got you fired up on that one. I appreciate that. Do you know much about the MSS, Chinese intelligence? I wonder what level of familiarity / respect you have, because they seem like they have just gone leaps and bounds in the past few decades.
Yeah, I am willing to say that I have a very healthy respect for MSS. I have more knowledge than most people, but not the most knowledge of anybody at CIA. But when you think about the Ministry of State Security in China, you've got to look at them through a lens of not just their capability and their resources, which has grown along with Chinese resources, but also their foundation and their beginnings, which came from SVR and KGB before that. So just like China has been on the rise economically and they've been on the rise technologically, there's no reason to suspect that they're not on the rise through their espionage practices as well.
I would say probably even more so because, and I'm sure, look, tell me what you think, but states like Russia, right? They're never going to beat, especially as we've seen now, they're never going to beat a major world power in an armed conflict. That is just not going to happen. Look, nukes aside, whatever. They have to rely on the cyber capabilities, intelligence capabilities. Israel's very similar, right? They're not going to be able to invade 7 countries or whatever it is. Right. They got to have amazing intelligence and cyber capabilities, failures aside. China's very similar, right? Them building a navy, it's happening, but it's still kind of a joke. Space program, again, happening, still not really up to snuff. They're making tons of strides, don't get me wrong, but it just makes sense that they would have a disproportionate intelligence program, because if they can invest a few $1 billion in that, it's going to punch a lot harder than another battleship.
Well, the other thing to keep in mind is that China's intelligence program, it's not just about having a capable intelligence program, it's about having time. From 2001 to 2022, the United States was not focused on intelligence. We were fighting a war on terror. China was not part of that war on terror. So for 21 years, they got to invest their growth in a different capability. Military modernization, technological innovation, the spreading of the Belt and Road Initiative, the spreading of Chinese influence around the world. They did not get distracted by a war on terror. So all the trillions that we spent on a war on terror, they invested somewhere else. And if we're not getting an ROI on our investment, just think about the ROI they are getting on theirs.
Yeah, exactly. I do, of course, think and worry about that quite a bit. My friends who are operating in the Middle East told me, hey, there's a Chinese base near us, and I think it was Djibouti, actually, I take it back, in Africa.
Still the Middle East.
Yeah, the Horn of Africa. Yeah. They said that whenever they're out operating, there's just this Chinese base, and they can just see there's antennas, they're looking at them, they'll drive around, they'll get close to what they're doing. They're testing weapons. The Chinese are just sitting there looking at them, taking pictures. When they were doing they would even get in firefights, not in Djibouti, of course, but in other areas. And they said there was just this Chinese unit that would de-conflict and call in and go, hey, we're just Chinese guys over here. Don't shoot at us. We're just over here observing what's going on because we have interests in the area. And they're like, what Chinese interests are in the area?
Yeah.
And they were just watching how America fights, how ISIS fight, whatever it was, just watching everything happen, just kind of just sitting over there videotaping the whole thing. It was, a wake-up call that nobody's apparently
waking up to. Because they do a fantastic job of creating a narrative that they're our friend, that they're a trading partner, and that we are economically tied together. And in reality, they are creating lots of economic divergence that gives them the option of not cooperating with us anymore.
Yeah, they have to, because otherwise we can unplug them from the markets.
Exactly. And the whole world, that's the problem, is that the American MO of economic leverage and economic dependency, that thing that keeps us in control of NATO, that thing that keeps us in control of our relationships in South America and Latin America, China woke up to that and then started duplicating and mimicking it. And then during the whole global war on terror, they were just making more and more people dependent and reliant on them. And now we're at a place where Biden and Trump woke up and they were like, oh shit, COVID happened. Had COVID not happened.
I know.
Holy shit, dude.
Ironically, probably caused by Chinese incompetence and or malice, and also certainly the Xi Jinping overplayed his hand with COVID. All we can do, tell me if you agree, all we can do is hope that Xi Jinping continues to overplay his hand. That's really the only thing that's going to stop China, is if the man at the top and the cult of personality screws up and makes a couple bad moves.
Yeah, I mean, that's the soft underbelly of authoritarianism, right? That's the same thing with Putin, and the same thing with Kim Jong-un, and the same thing with even with Netanyahu right now. When strong men governments, authoritarian governments, when they overplay their hand, when they make a mistake, nobody says no.
Yeah, nobody says no.
Whereas here in a democracy, lots of people might be like, I don't think that's a good idea.
Yeah.
And some people even put their foot down and make it a public offense and whatever else. Right. But bad ideas slow down. Good ideas slow down too.
Tell me about, if we could do a quick comparison, tell me about CIA compared to the FSB, compared to Mossad, for example. And also, let's throw out for honorable mention the ISI over in Pakistan. Have you dealt with them? Well, don't tell me that. Yeah.
Yeah. So if you were comparing CIA to the various intelligence, so for an apples to apples comparison, we have to compare them against the foreign intelligence collection capability in other countries.
Right.
So in Russia, the foreign collection is SVR. FSB is their internal collection. So Russia's SVR versus America's CIA. America's CIA is better funded, it's more modern, it's based in democratic principles, right? So it's more motivational than manipulative. SVR is more manipulative than motivational. However, they're ruthlessly pragmatic. They are also very well funded. They are less reliant on modern technology, but way more capable in the proven traditional tactics. Like in CIA, if we think we can do something with cyber that we don't need humans for, we'll just do it with cyber. But in Russia, they're like, we will do both.
Yeah.
Right? Why not? Compare that with something like Mossad. Mossad is the external intelligence collection capability for Israel. The internal police, of the Shin Bet, right? Internal FSB equivalent is Shin Bet. When Mossad goes out, a big part of the difference between Mossad and CIA is Mossad knows everything around Israel wants to kill Israel.
Right.
In the United States, we don't feel an imminent threat from all around us. So our risk tolerance as CIA is much reduced. The risk tolerance for Mossad is almost non-existent.
Yeah.
If they need to ride a bicycle next to a car and stick a bomb to it, they will.
Yeah.
Right? If they need to kill somebody in a public square to keep Israel safe, they will. So very capable, very well funded, very skilled, but also like very brazen.
Yeah, I wondered why you thought that is. I mean, I was reading an interview with like a nuclear scientist in Iran, and he's like, can you believe they blew up this car and how they're coming after me? And I was like, yeah, you work for an enemy state and you're trying to get nuclear weapons. They will drone strike you with your family in the car. I'm not sure how bad any of us should feel about that.
With a second drone to put the whole thing on Instagram.
Right, yeah.
Right? Yes. They will do that.
To show everybody, we did that. And people go, wow. You see this on like Instagram. They go, how do we know that Israel did that? They admitted it. Why would they do that? You know how good the branding is when you can be in Tehran at a cafe and someone rides by on a motorcycle and shoots every single person at the meeting and then gets away with it? Or what was the other one that they did where the Mossad had like rigged up a truck with a 50 cal machine gun or whatever in the back. The truck drove next to this guy who was in a convoy, shot the car into a million pieces, and then when people were like, who's in that damn truck, it blew itself up, and they videotaped the whole thing. It's just nuts.
It's branding. It sends a message. It's covert influence simultaneous with covert action. It's a 2-for-1.
Yeah.
It's a 2-for-1, right? But they're not the only brazen service out there, right? Pakistani ISI, also along with the India RAW, the Research and Analysis Wing. ISI for Pakistan and RAW for India, very brazen intelligence services with a foreign collection priority that nobody even knows exists because they're primarily working against each other.
Working against each other, yeah, exactly.
But the shit they do with each other is nuts. I mean, they basically carry out covert terrorist operations against each other. They sabotage each other. They steal from each other. They have no problem with assassinating leadership from each other's countries. Like, it's a nutsoid world, especially when you consider the fact that both Pakistan and India are American allies. And somehow these two very talented services, probably trained by us, are taking that training to fight each other and using techniques that we would never sanction in a million years.
Yeah, very interesting.
And then the last one I'll mention, we've already talked about MSS, but I'll throw out there that the MSS for China, China's Foreign Intelligence Service, is all the best parts of SVR. They've learned so much, they've been funded so well, but they are even less risk tolerant than CIA. Because where CIA has no problem being the world's bad guy, MSS doesn't want to be the world's bad guy.
No, they want to save face, They're also, I've seen some clunky crap from them that I was surprised, because I thought, my friend, they tried to honey trap a friend of mine. Very messy. I mean, very sloppy, amateur, bullshitty kind of, but also kind of KGB-ish. Like, really, like, out there.
What kind of girl do you like?
Yeah, and it was just like, it was a fake interview that with a journalist, and then she wanted to do it in her hotel room, and I was like, are they just trying to get you to realize what this is, or is it just really, really clunky? And I'm sort of on the fence, but I don't know. It could have been one or the other.
Because they're also like decentralized in a lot of ways, and they don't report up bad news very well. So it could have just been. It could have been sloppy, or it could have been amateur, or it could have been just a junior officer making a bad call.
Yeah.
Because how do you get promoted in China? You're the son or the nephew of somebody else.
Yeah, that's what's going to end up bringing China down, is the bullshit sort of Nepo baby crap that we definitely have here, but over there Russia has it too. It's called blyad, and not blyat. That's something else. Blyad. It's like the way you get ahead is your uncle owns the factory. You literally have no chance of doing anything other than assembly line work if you're not really, like, all the managers are related, except for the guy who's in the mafia, and his uncle pulled the thing with the thing, and then now he's working. It's just the whole system works like that, and it's really it's why people are leaving China and coming here to work and moving to Canada.
And surprised they're not all Chinese agents.
What's that?
Surprised they're not all Chinese agents.
Surprised. They actually really are stoked to be in the United States. The joke that a lot of us make about China, who are like China watchers or hanging out with people who've emigrated here, is there's a certain group of people that have moved here from China, and they nonstop complain about the United States, but then the next sentence is how they want to bring their parents over here to live when they're retired. And it's like, didn't you just get done telling me how much you hate this place? And you drink it a bit and they go, yeah, but I can't say that stuff about China because my family will get in trouble with the police. And you're just like, oh, it's almost cute at that point.
Yeah.
It's like you're just sitting here complaining because you're not allowed to do that over there. It's kind of hilarious. I love China and Chinese culture, but I'm CCP. I have a very
political.
different opinion. Do you think the CIA's reputation has been damaged by news and events over the past few years?
I think CIA's reputation is and always will be bad, only because they have secrets that no one's allowed to know. Yeah. And they will always have secrets that no one's allowed to know. And when you have secrets that somebody else can't know, the natural thing to do is to distrust and accuse you of all sorts of shit. CIA is never going to be popular. It's never going to be liked. It's never going to be loved by the majority. But there will always be a group who understand that it's a pragmatic service, and those secrets are required, and they give us an edge.
Would you recommend a CIA career in general?
I would recommend a CIA career to people who are willing to accept the reality of what a CIA career means. It means you aren't the most important. The service is the most important. It means you will lie to everybody. It means you will take advantage of people because somebody above you in the chain of command tells you it's what needs to be done. And most importantly, you have to understand CIA's mission is not protecting the American people, it's protecting American interests as defined by policymakers. So if you go in thinking that you're going to do something that keeps your family safe, you need to let that go, because what you're actually doing is you're doing what the senator of Wisconsin decides is important when they sit on the Senate Intelligence Committee, and you just your job is to do what they say. That is not the same thing as the nationalistic pitch that they use to recruit people into CIA.
What's your favorite spy show?
The one that I am building based off of my book, not the one that there's really nothing out there that's that great.
Okay, then we'll talk about that in a future episode. Man, I have so many more questions, but I think we have to do a separate episode just about current events and rally up on that. Thank you so much for coming out to my kitchen/studio/living room. I really appreciate it, man. It's good to finally meet you.
Dude, it was awesome to have this peek into your life and to finally get a chance to sit with you, and I'm excited for next time.
Thank you for checking out this entire episode on YouTube. If you want to follow up on this topic, check out our podcast feed or visit us on our website at jordanharbinger.com, where you can learn more about our guest and dive even deeper into what we discussed today. And remember, YouTube only has about a quarter of the episodes that we release here on the Jordan Harbinger Show audio feed. Any podcast app should have us. Check out the links in the description where you'll find access to all of our shows that don't appear on YouTube, such as Skeptical Sunday, where we debunk topics like crystal healing, GMOs, conspiracy theories, homeopathy, tipping, and even lawns to find out if they're backed by science and or logic. Also, our Feedback Friday episodes where we help people escape from cults, get raises at work, and take all manner of questions from you, the audience, and some of that stuff is dicey. Every episode of the Jordan Harbinger Show has something useful that you can take away and apply in your own life and help you navigate what I know can often seem like the overwhelming and paralyzing challenges of modern life. Thank you for watching, and remember to like, comment, and subscribe.